You think you're tough because you scare an old man behind a bar. Ethan Walker's voice cut through the silence like a blade, low, steady, and terrifying in its calm. The young thug who had just slammed a waitress into a wall froze. Not because of the words, because of the eyes. Those weren't the eyes of a bartender. Those were the eyes of a man who had buried people who talked the way Derek Hayes talked. And tonight, after 15 years of silence, the man they all underestimated was done pretending. Before we begin, if you love stories about real strength, loyalty, and the men nobody saw coming, subscribe to this channel and follow this story all the way to the end. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from so I can see just how far this story travels. Now let me tell you about the night the desert highway stood still. The phone rang at 6:14 in the morning. Ethan Walker was already awake. He was always awake before the sun. 60 years of living had trained his body to rise with the darkness long before the light had any say in the matter. He stood behind the counter of the Silver Canyon Roadhouse, wiping down the same wooden surface he had wiped down every single morning for the past 15 years. The phone kept ringing. He didn't answer it. I knew who it was. He always knew. There were only 3 people in the world who had that number, and 2 of them were dead. The ringing stopped. Ethan placed both hands flat on the counter and exhaled. His knuckles were scarred thick white lines crossing over sun-darkened skin. The kind of scars that don't come from kitchen accidents or carpentry work. The kind that come from hitting things that hit back. He poured himself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and drank it standing up. That was Ethan Walker's life. Quiet, ordinary, invisible. And he had fought like hell to keep it that way. Emily Carter arrived at 7:30, same as every day. She pushed through the front door with her shoulder because her hands were full, a paper bag of groceries in one arm, her phone pressed between her ear and her shoulder. Yeah, Mom, I'm fine. No, I didn't forget. I'll call you tonight. Yes, I promise. Love you too. She dropped the bag on the counter and looked at Ethan. You look tired, she said. I'm 60, Ethan said. Tired is my default setting. Emily laughed. It was the kind of laugh that filled a room bright and unguarded. She was 26 years old, blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, and she had the kind of energy that made everyone around her feel younger. She'd been working at the Roadhouse for 3 years now, ever since she'd shown up one night with a busted taillight and no money for gas. Ethan had given her a tank of gas and a job. He never told her why. But if you look closely, if you really paid attention, you would notice the way Ethan watched over her. Not like an employer, not like a friend, like a man who had lost a daughter he never had and had been given a second chance to protect someone who reminded him of everything good he had walked away from. Coffee's already made, Ethan said. You always say that like it's a gift, Emily said, pouring herself a cup. It's literally the worst coffee in Arizona. It's honest coffee. It's punishment in a mug. Ethan almost smiled. Almost. The Silver Canyon Roadhouse sat on a 2-lane highway that connected nothing to nowhere. It was the kind of place people found by accident and remembered for reasons they couldn't explain. The regulars were truckers, retirees, highway patrol, officers on their lunch breaks, and the occasional lost tourist who wandered in looking for directions and stayed for the pie. Ethan didn't advertise. He didn't have a website. He didn't even have a sign that worked after dark. The neon had burned out 6 years ago, and he never bothered to fix it. But the Roadhouse survived. It survived because Ethan Walker made people feel safe. He listened without judging. He poured drinks without asking questions. And when trouble walked through the door, which it did from time to time, he handled it so quietly that most people didn't even realize anything had happened. There was a story the regulars told about a night 3 years back when a drunk trucker, twice Ethan's size, had pulled a knife on another customer over a poker game. Nobody saw exactly what happened. 1 second, the trucker was waving a blade. The next second, he was sitting in a chair, calm as a church mouse with his knife somehow on the counter and his arm bent at an angle that suggested he would be visiting a hospital very soon. Ethan had simply said, "You're done for the night, friend." The trucker had nodded, paid his tab, left without a word. Nobody talked about it. Ethan didn't talk about it, but after that night, the regulars looked at him a little differently. Not with fear, with something closer to wonder. Who was this man? By noon, the Roadhouse had its usual crowd. Frank Delgado, a 72-year-old retired sheriff, sat in his regular booth with a cup of Ethan's terrible coffee and the newspaper he'd already read twice. "Ethan," Frank said without looking up from the paper, "you hear about those boys causing trouble up on Route 9? Ethan was stacking glasses behind the bar. "What boys?" "Young crew, 5, maybe 6 of them. Been hitting businesses between here and Tucson. Protection racket, pay up or they break things. Classic shakedown." Ethan said nothing. Frank lowered the paper and looked at him. "They hit Martinez's gas station last week. Broke his front window. Told him if he didn't pay $500 a month, they'd come back and break him. Martinez pay. What do you think? He's 68 years old and his wife has cancer. He's not going to fight a bunch of kids with baseball bats." Ethan placed a glass on the shelf, then another, then another. "You gonna say something?" Frank asked. "What do you want me to say, Frank?" "I want you to say, you'll be careful. These aren't drunk tourists. The guy running them, kid named Derek Hayes, he's smart. Mean smart. The kind of smart that makes stupid people feel powerful." Ethan looked at Frank for a long moment. "I appreciate you looking out." "I'm not looking out. I'm warning you. This place is exactly the kind of target those boys are looking for. Isolated. No cameras. Owner who looks like he couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag." Ethan's mouth twitched. "Wet paper bag. No offense. Some taken." Frank folded his newspaper and leaned forward. His voice dropped. "Ethan, I've known you for 12 years. In all that time, I've never once heard you talk about where you came from. I've never seen a photo of your family. I've never heard you mention a single person from your past. Now, I'm an old lawman. I know what a man running from something looks like. And I'm telling you, whatever you're running from, I hope it's not the kind of thing that runs back." Ethan held Frank's gaze. "It won't," he said quietly. "I made sure of that." Frank studied him for a moment longer, then nodded slowly and went back to his newspaper. But Ethan's hands had stopped moving. The glass he was holding stayed in midair for just a second too long. Frank noticed. He always noticed. That evening, Emily was closing out the register when she brought up something she'd been sitting on all day. "Ethan, can I ask you something personal?" "Depends on how personal." "Why don't you ever talk about your wife?" Ethan's hands froze on the dish rag he was holding. Just for a heartbeat. Then he resumed wiping. "What makes you think I had a wife?" Emily pointed to his left hand. "You don't wear a ring, but there's a tan line where one used to be. And sometimes when you think nobody's watching you, touch that spot on your finger, like you're checking if it's still there." Ethan looked at his hand, then he looked at Emily. "You're too observant for your own good. You're too secretive for yours. Was she nice?" A long pause. "So, she was the best person I ever knew," Ethan said. His voice was different when he said it softer, like a man speaking in a church. "She was the only person who ever looked at me and saw who I could be instead of who I was." "What happened to her?" "She got sick, the kind of sick that doesn't get better." "I'm sorry, Ethan." "She made me promise something before she died." Emily waited. "She said, don't spend the rest of your life fighting battles that destroy your soul. And did you keep that promise?" Ethan looked at her, really looked at her, and for just a moment the mask slipped. Behind those quiet eyes was something vast and heavy and old. Something that had seen too much darkness and to ever fully step into the light. "Every single day," he said, "for 15 years. Emily didn't push further. She had learned that about Ethan there were doors you could knock on and doors you left alone. But that night, for the first time in 3 years, she went home wondering what kind of battles a small-town bartender could possibly have fought. 3 days later, they came. It was a Tuesday night. The Roadhouse had maybe 8 customers, Frank in his booth, a couple of truckers playing pool, a young couple sharing a plate of nachos, and old Ray Patterson, who came in every Tuesday to drink exactly 3 beers, talk about his dead dog, and leave a $10 tip. The door opened at 9:47 p.m. 6 men walked in. The first thing Ethan noticed was the way they entered. Not like customers, like occupiers. They spread out immediately, 2 to the left, 2 to the right, 2 straight down the center. It was a formation. Someone had taught them how to control a room. The man in front was young, maybe 30. Dark hair, sharp jaw, expensive watch on his left wrist. He wore a leather jacket that cost more than most of the cars in the parking lot. He moved with the loose confidence of a man who had never been seriously hurt, the kind of confidence that comes from always being the one doing the hurting. This was Derek Hayes. He walked up to the bar and sat down on a stool. He looked at Ethan the way a cat looks at a mouse it hasn't decided to kill yet. "Nice place," Derek said. "Real cozy." Ethan didn't move. "What can I get you?" "Information. Who owns this place?" "I do." Derek smiled. It was not a friendly smile. "Then you and I need to have a conversation about your future." "I'm not interested in conversations about my future." "That's funny, because your future just walked through that door." One of Derek's men, a heavy-set guy with a shaved head and a neck tattoo, walked behind the bar without asking. He started pulling bottles off the shelves, reading labels, putting them back carelessly. Ethan watched him. "Tell your friend to get out from behind my bar," Ethan said. His voice hadn't changed, same flat, quiet tone. But something in the room shifted. The truckers at the pool table stopped playing. Frank put down his newspaper. Derek leaned forward. "Or what?" "Or he's going to have a very bad night." Derek laughed. His men laughed. The sound filled the roadhouse like something poisonous. "Old man," Derek said, "let me explain something to you. Every business on this highway pays me a fee. Call it insurance. Call it protection. Call it whatever makes you sleep at night. But the number is $1,000 a month, and the first payment is due right now." "No." The word landed like a stone dropped into still water. Derek blinked. "Excuse me?" "I said no, I don't pay protection money. I never have. And I'm not going to start tonight because some kid in an expensive jacket tells me to." The room went absolutely silent. Derek's smile disappeared. What replaced it was something cold and calculated, the look of a man who was used to breaking people and was deciding where to start. "You know what?" Derek said. "I was going to be nice about this. I was going to give you the speech, let you think it over, come back in a week. But you just disrespected me in front of my crew. So now we're going to do this the hard way." He snapped his fingers. Two of his men grabbed the young couple's table and flipped it. Nachos, drinks, everything crashed to the floor. The woman screamed. The man tried to stand up, and one of Derek's crew shoved him back down so hard the chair skidded. Another one of Derek's men walked up to old Ray Patterson and knocked the beer out of his hand. "Hey," Ray shouted. The man leaned down into Ray's face. "Sit down, Grandpa, unless you want to lose what's left of your teeth." Ray's eyes went wide. He sat down. Frank Delgado stood up slowly from his booth. His hand went instinctively to his hip, an old habit from 40 years of carrying a badge. "Son," Frank said to Derek, "I'm a retired sheriff. Whatever you think you're doing here, I promise you it's not going to end the way you—" "Retired means nobody cares what you think," Derek said without looking at him. "Sit down, old-timer, before I make you a statistic." Frank didn't sit, but he didn't move forward either. His eyes found Ethan's across the room. Ethan gave him the smallest shake of his head. "Not yet." Frank understood. He sat back down, but his jaw was tight and his hands were fists under the table. Derek turned back to Ethan. "Last chance, bartender. $1,000 right now, or this place doesn't open tomorrow." Ethan placed both hands on the counter, the same counter he had wiped down every morning for 15 years. The same counter Claire would have loved because it was honest and simple and real. "No," Ethan said again. Derek stared at him. Then he turned to the biggest man in his crew, a 6'4" monster named Colt, and said two words: "The girl." Colt moved fast for a big man. He crossed the room in 3 strides and grabbed Emily by the arm. She had been standing near the kitchen door, frozen, trying to make herself invisible. Colt pulled her forward. Emily cried out a sharp, startled sound that cut through Ethan like a bullet. "Let her go," Ethan said. His voice had changed. Everyone in the room heard it. It was subtle, like the difference between a calm sea and a sea that has gone still before a hurricane. The words were the same flat tone, but beneath them was something ancient and dangerous. Something that had been sleeping for 15 years and had just opened one eye. Derek didn't hear it. He was too young, too arrogant, too convinced of his own power to recognize real power when it spoke. "Here's what's going to happen," Derek said, walking toward Emily. "My friend Colt here is going to hold your little waitress, and you're going to go to that register, take out every dollar inside it, and hand it to me. And then you're going to thank me for not burning this place to the ground. That's the deal. That's the only deal." Emily was shaking. Colt had her arm bent behind her back. She looked at Ethan with wide, terrified eyes. "Ethan," she whispered, "it's okay. Just give him the money." "No," Ethan said, not to Derek, to Emily. "It's not okay. He stepped out from behind the bar. Something happened in that moment that nobody in the room would ever be able to fully explain. It was like watching a man take off a costume, like watching someone stop pretending. Ethan Walker didn't get bigger, he didn't get louder, he didn't puff up his chest or crack his knuckles or do any of the things tough guys do in movies. He just changed. The way he stood, the way his weight shifted, the way his eyes locked onto Derek with the flat, patient focus of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. Frank Delgado saw it first, and the retired sheriff, a man who had faced down armed criminals for 4 decades, felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up. "Mother of God," Frank whispered to himself, "is on what is he brown?" "Let the girl go," Ethan said, walking toward Colt. "I'm not going to ask you again." Colt laughed. "What are you going to do, old man? You're 60 years old. I could snap you like—" Ethan moved. It wasn't fast the way young men are fast, all adrenaline and muscle. It was fast the way a rattlesnake is fast, efficient, final. One moment he was standing 6 feet away from Colt. The next moment his hand was on Colt's wrist, the one holding Emily, and he applied pressure to a point that most people don't even know exists. Colt's grip released instantly, not because he wanted to let go, because his hand stopped working. The pain was so sudden and so complete that the big man dropped to one knee, gasping. Emily stumbled free. "Go to the kitchen," Ethan said to her quietly. "Lock the door. Don't come out until I tell you." Emily ran. Ethan released Colt's wrist and stepped back. Colt stayed on the ground, cradling his hand, staring up at Ethan with an expression that was equal parts pain and disbelief. "Who the hell are you?" Colt breathed. Ethan didn't answer. Derek's crew had gone rigid. 5 men all armed with knives and bats and the casual cruelty of youth, and every single one of them was looking at their biggest, strongest member kneeling on the floor of a roadside bar, taken down by a 60-year-old man who hadn't even broken a sweat. Derek himself had gone pale, but he recovered quickly. Credit where it's due, the kid was tough in his own reckless way. "You just made the worst mistake of your life," Derek said. "Son," Ethan said, and his voice carried the full weight of 60 years of living. "You have no idea how many people have said that to me, and you have no idea how wrong every single one of them was." Derek pulled a knife from his belt. It was a tactical, folder, expensive sharp, the kind of knife carried by men who wanted to feel dangerous. Ethan looked at the knife. Then he looked at Derek. "Put that away before someone gets hurt," Ethan said. "And I don't mean me. You think because you know some bar trick you're scary. I've got 6 men in here. 6. You're one old man with a bad attitude. Do the math." "I've done the math," Ethan said, "and it doesn't work in your favor." Derek lunged. It was a sloppy attack, fast but undisciplined, the kind of move made by a man who had never fought anyone who knew what they were doing. He swung the knife in a wide arc aimed at Ethan's midsection. Ethan sidestepped. Not dramatically, not with any wasted motion. He simply wasn't where the knife was anymore. And in the same movement, the same single fluid motion, he caught Derek's wrist, redirected his momentum, and drove his forearm across Derek's chest. Derek hit the bar hard enough to knock the breath out of him. The knife clattered to the floor. Ethan kicked it away without looking. He didn't hit Derek. He didn't need to. He simply held him against the bar with one hand, fingers locked around the younger man's collar, and leaned in close. "Listen to me very carefully," Ethan said. "I'm going to let you go. You're going to take your boys and walk out that door. You're going to get in your cars. You're going to drive away. And you are never, ever getting to come back to this place." Derek's eyes were wide. Up close, pinned against the bar, he could see Ethan's eyes clearly for the first time. And what he saw there scared him more than the physical skill, more than the speed, more than anything he had experienced in his short, violent career. He saw a man who was holding back, not struggling, not straining, holding back, the way a man holds back a flood, the way a man keeps a beast on a leash. Ethan Walker was not using his full capability, and the fraction he was showing was enough to make a room full of violent men freeze. "You don't know who you're dealing with," Derek managed to say, but his voice cracked. "No," Ethan said. "You don't know who you're dealing with, and I pray you never find out." He released Derek. Derek stumbled backward. His crew gathered around him, 6 men angry, humiliated, and confused, and not one of them moved forward. "This isn't over," Derek said from the doorway. His voice had found some of its bravado again, but it was thin, fragile. The voice of a man who was already planning his revenge because his pride couldn't process what had just happened. It should be, Ethan said. Derek pointed at him. I'm coming back. And when I do, I'm bringing everyone, every single one, and we'll see how tough you are when it's 50 against 1. I won't be alone, Ethan said. Derek laughed a nervous, ugly sound. Who's going to help you, the old sheriff, the waitress? You've got nobody. Ethan said nothing. Derek and his crew left. Car engines roared. Tires sprayed gravel. The sound faded down the highway until the desert was silent again. Inside the Roadhouse, nobody moved for a full 30 seconds. Frank Delgado was the first to speak. Ethan. Frank. What the hell just happened? Some boys came in looking for trouble. I showed them the door. Don't do that. Don't do the bartender thing. Not after what I just saw. Frank stood up and walked to the bar. He planted both hands on the counter and looked Ethan dead in the eye. In 41 years of law enforcement, I have seen exactly 3 men move the way you just moved. One was a special forces instructor at Fort Bragg. One was a federal marshal who had more confirmed kills than I want to think about. And the third was a man I arrested in 1993 who turned out to be a contract enforcer for one of the most dangerous organizations in America. Ethan held his gaze. Which one are you? Frank asked quietly. I'm a bartender, Frank. The hell you are. Emily emerged from the kitchen. Her hands were still shaking. She had heard most of it. The thin kitchen door didn't block much sound. Ethan, she said, her voice trembling. He said he's coming back. I know. He said 50 men. He'll bring 50 men. I heard him. What are we going to do? Ethan started picking up the overturned furniture. Calmly, methodically, like a man who had done this before, not just cleaned up a bar, but cleaned up after violence, like it was routine, like it was muscle memory. Ethan, Emily's voice was sharp now, fear turning to frustration. Answer me, what are we going to do? He set a chair upright and looked at her. Emily, I need you to trust me. Trust you? I just watched you disarm a man twice your size, like it was nothing. I don't even know who you are. You know exactly who I am. I'm the man who gave you a job when you had nothing. I'm the man who fixed your car when you couldn't afford a mechanic. I'm the man who sat with you in the hospital when your mother had her surgery. That's who I am. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Then why do I feel like I'm looking at a stranger? Ethan walked over to her. He put his hands on her shoulders gently the way a father would. Because some strangers have been keeping you safe your whole life, he said, and you just didn't know it. That night, after everyone had gone home, Ethan locked the front door and stood alone in the empty bar. He walked behind the counter. He crouched down and reached into the space beneath the lowest shelf, a space that no one else knew existed because Ethan had built it himself 15 years ago on his first night in this building. His fingers found the wooden panel. He pressed it in a specific spot and it popped open. Inside was a phone, not a smartphone, not anything modern. An old flip phone, the kind that hadn't been made in 20 years. It was wrapped in a cloth, and the cloth was wrapped around something else, a photograph. Ethan took out the phone first. He turned it on. The battery still held a charge. He made sure of that, checking it once a month, every month for 15 years. Not because he planned to use it, because he knew that someday he might have no choice. He stared at the phone for a long time. Then he picked up the photograph. It showed a younger version of himself, maybe 40-45, blonde hair without the gray. Fewer lines on the face. Same eyes, though. The eyes hadn't changed. He was standing with a group of men, dozens of them. They wore leather. They stood in front of a row of motorcycles that stretched beyond the frame of the photo. And on the back of every jacket was a patch that would make most people in America cross to the other side of the street. Hell's Angels. Ethan's hands didn't shake. His breathing didn't change. But something in his expression shifted, a door opening into a room he had locked 15 years ago and promised he would never enter again. Claire, he said to the empty bar, I'm sorry. He dialed the number. It rang once. A voice answered, deep graveled, the voice of a man who had lived hard and survived harder. I was wondering when you'd call, the voice said. I need help, Mac. A pause. Then how bad? Bad enough that I'm calling you. Another pause. Longer this time. Where? Silver Canyon Roadhouse. Highway 87, Arizona. I know where you are, brother. I've always known where you are. Ethan closed his eyes. How many do you need? Mac asked. However many you can bring. When He said he's coming back. Could be days, could be tomorrow. Then we ride tonight. The line went dead. Ethan put the phone down. He picked up the photograph again and looked at it, at the man he used to be standing among the men who used to be his family. He opened his wallet and took out another photograph. This one was smaller, worn soft at the edges from years of being carried. It showed a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Claire. He placed both photographs on the counter side by side. The man he was, the woman who saved him, and the promise he was about to break. I know what I said, he whispered. But they touched the girl, Claire. They threatened people who can't defend themselves. And if I do nothing, if I stay behind this bar and pretend I'm just an old man who pours drinks, then I'm not the man you married. I'm just the man you wanted me to become. And right now, they don't need that man. He put the photographs away. He picked up the dish rag. And for the last time, Ethan Walker wiped down the bar as the man he had pretended to be for 15 years. Because by morning, the pretending would be over. And the highway would learn what the desert already knew, that some men don't fade away. They just wait. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark bar with the old flip phone on the counter in front of him and waited. Not for Derek, not for Mac. He waited for the guilt to arrive, the way he knew it would, slow and heavy like a freight train coming down a long straight track. He had made the call. He had broken the promise. And now the only question was whether Claire, wherever she was, understood why. He picked up her photograph one more time. You always said I was better than the life I lived, he said to her face. But you never told me what to do when the life I left behind comes looking for the people I love. He put the photograph back in his wallet. At 4:00 a.m., his regular phone buzzed. A text from Emily. Can't sleep. Are we safe? He typed back, yes. He didn't know if it was true, but that was what fathers did. They lied about safety until they could make it real. By 5:00 a.m., Ethan was behind the counter making coffee. Same routine, same terrible coffee, same quiet hands moving through the same motions. But nothing was the same, and he knew it. The call he made last night had set something in motion that could not be undone. Mac was coming, and Mac never came alone. The phone behind the bar, the old one, the hidden one, buzzed once at 5:47 a.m. A single text. 12 hours. That was it. No name, no details, just a timeline. 12 hours. Ethan poured his coffee and drank it standing up. His hands were steady. His breathing was even. But inside his chest, something that had been dormant for 15 years was waking up. Not anger, not fear, but the cold operational clarity of a man who had spent decades preparing for moments exactly like this one. He had tried to bury that man. He had tried to drown him in coffee and routine and silence. But the truth about men like Ethan Walker was simple. You could bury the past, but you could never kill it. It was always there underneath, breathing in the dark, waiting for someone to dig it up. Derek Hayes had just handed it a shovel. Emily arrived at 7:30, same as always. But she wasn't the same Emily. She walked in without groceries, without her phone pressed to her ear, without the bright energy that usually filled the room. She looked like she hadn't slept either. Morning, Ethan said. Don't morning me. She dropped her bag on a chair and stared at him. I need answers, Ethan. Real one. Not bartender answers. Not, I'm fine, everything's fine answers. I watched you drop a man who outweighed you by 100 pounds without even trying. I need to know who taught you that. Emily. No, I've followed your rules for 3 years. Don't ask about the past. Don't push. Don't pry. Fine, I respected that. But last night a man grabbed me and threatened to hurt me, and the only reason I'm standing here is because you turned into someone I've never seen before. So the rules are done. Talk to me. Ethan set down the dish rag. He looked at her for a long moment, this girl who reminded him so much of Claire that sometimes it physically hurt to be in the same room with her. Same stubborn jaw, same fire in the eyes, same refusal to let anyone protect her without an explanation. Sit down, he said. Emily sat. Ethan didn't sit. He stayed behind the bar because the bar was his wall, his barrier, the thing that separated the man he was now from the man he used to be. As long as he stood behind it, he was still the bartender. Before I owned this place, he said, I was part of something. What kind of something? The kind of something that doesn't have a recruitment website. Ethan. I was a member of an organization, a brotherhood. We rode together, lived together, fought together, For a lot of years, it was the only family I had. Emily's face changed. You were in a gang. Don't call it a gang. It wasn't a gang. It was, he stopped. Okay, to the outside world, it looked like a gang. But from the inside, it was a family. A complicated, dangerous, sometimes terrible family, but a family. We had rules, we had loyalty, we had a code. What organization? Ethan met her eyes. Hell's Angels. The name landed in the room like a dropped bomb. Emily's mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. You're joking. Do I look like I'm joking? You're a bartender in Arizona. You make terrible coffee. You fix broken chairs. You watch Jeopardy every night at 7. I also used to be one of the most trusted members of the largest motorcycle organization in the world. People contain multitudes, Emily. She stared at him. How long? 20 years. 20 years. You were Hell's Angels for 20 years. I was. And you just what retired? I walked away. People don't just walk away from Hell's Angels. No, Ethan said. They don't. But I did. Because Claire asked me to, and there was nothing in this world I wouldn't do for that woman. Emily leaned back in her chair. She was trying to fit this new information into the Ethan-shaped box she had built in her head for 3 years, and the box was shattering. Last night, she said slowly, when you grabbed that man's wrist, when you moved like that, that was real. That was muscle memory. 15 years of trying to forget, and my hands still remember. What did you do for them in the club? I was a protector. That was my role. When someone in the family was threatened, I handled it. When a situation needed to be resolved without police, without lawyers, without any record that anything had ever happened, they called me. You were an enforcer. I was a protector. There's a difference. Is there? The difference is that I never started a fight, not once. I ended them. That was my job, to stand between our people and whatever was trying to hurt them and to make sure the threat stopped. Permanently if necessary. Emily's voice dropped. Did you ever? Don't finish that question, Ethan said. Not harshly, gently. The way you stop someone from opening a door that leads somewhere they can't come back from. Some things need to stay buried, Emily, not for my sake, for yours. She swallowed hard. Why are you telling me this now, she asked. Because Derek Hayes is coming back. And when he does, he's not coming alone. And what happens next, you need to understand what you're going to see. You need to be prepared. Prepared for what? I made a call last night, after everyone left. I called someone from my old life. Emily's eyes went wide. You called them? You called the Hell's Angels. I called my brother Mac. He's the only person from that world I've stayed in contact with. Once a month, I check the phone. Once a year on Claire's birthday, he sends me a message. That's it. That's the only thread left between me and who I used to be. And you pulled that thread. I had to. Why we could have called the police. We could have. Emily, listen to me. I've been dealing with men like Derek Hayes my entire life. The police will come take a report, maybe arrest 1 or 2 of his guys and then leave. Derek will bail out in 12 hours and come back angrier. The restraining order will take weeks. And in those weeks, he will burn this place to the ground with us inside it. That's not paranoia, that's experience. So what's the alternative, a biker army? The alternative is that Derek learns something tonight that he will never learn from a police report or a courtroom. He will learn that the old man behind this bar is not alone. He will learn that touching someone I care about has consequences that no amount of money or muscle can protect him from. And he will learn it in a way that he remembers for the rest of his life. Emily stared at him. You're scaring me, Ethan. Good, because you should be a little scared. What's coming tonight is going to be loud. It's going to be intense. And it's going to look like something out of a world you've never been part of. But I need you to trust me the same way you've trusted me for 3 years, that when it's over, you'll be safe. That's all I've ever wanted. That's all I've ever done. Keep you safe. Emily's eyes filled. Is that why you gave me this job? Because you were what? Protecting me. I gave you this job because you showed up with nothing and reminded me of someone I lost. And I swore to myself that if God or the universe or whatever you want to call it gave me another chance to look after someone like Claire, I would not waste it. A tear ran down Emily's face. She wiped it fast the way people do when they don't want to look weak. She must have been amazing, Emily said. She was the only person who ever saw past the leather and the noise, and the reputation, and found the man underneath. And the man she found, the one standing in front of you right now, he exists because she pulled him out of the darkness. Every good thing about me is because of her. Emily stood up. She walked around the bar, something she rarely did, and she hugged him. Ethan stiffened. Physical affection was not something he was built for anymore. Not after 15 years of keeping the world at arm's length. But then his arms came up slowly and he hugged her back. "Whatever happens tonight," she said into his shoulder, "I'm not leaving." "Emily, I said I'm not leaving. This is my home too." Ethan closed his eyes. "You're as stubborn as she was." "Good." Frank Delgado showed up at noon. He wasn't wearing his usual retired old man clothes, khaki pants, and a polo shirt. He was wearing boots, jeans, and a jacket that Ethan recognized immediately as the kind of thing a man wears when he expects trouble. "Don't look at me like that," Frank said, sitting down at the bar. "I'm not here for coffee." "Then why are you here?" "Because I spent all night running your name through every database I still have access to. And you know what I found?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "Frank, nothing. I found absolutely nothing. No criminal record, no warrants, no arrests, not even a parking ticket. Ethan Walker is the cleanest name I've ever searched, which means one of two things. Either you're genuinely the most boring man in America, or someone very powerful made sure your past disappeared." Ethan said nothing. Frank leaned in. "I know what a scrubbed record looks like, Ethan. I've seen it 3 times in my career. Once for a federal witness, once for a retired CIA operative, and once for a man who cut a deal with the ATF so valuable that they erased every trace of his former life and gave him a new one." "That's a hell of a theory, Frank." "It's not a theory. It's the only explanation that fits. You were somebody big enough that when you wanted out, the government made it happen. They gave you a new name, a new location, and a bar in the middle of nowhere. And for 15 years it worked. Nobody came looking. Nobody found you. Until some punk kid with a protection racket kicked the door open and dragged the past into the present." Ethan stared at Frank for a long time. The old sheriff held his gaze without blinking. 41 years of interrogating liars had made Frank Delgado nearly impossible to fool. "You're smarter than you look, Frank. And you're more dangerous than you pretend. So here's what I need to know. Is something happening tonight that I should be aware of?" Ethan considered lying. It would have been easy. He had been lying for 15 years and he was very good at it. But Frank had earned the truth, and Ethan was tired of carrying secrets alone. "Yes," Ethan said. "Something is happening tonight. Derek. Derek is going to come back with every man he has. Probably tonight, maybe tomorrow. He can't let what happened last night stand. His pride won't allow it. And you're ready for that. I made a call." Frank's expression shifted. The investigator faded. The man appeared, and the man looked worried. "Who did you call, Ethan?" "Family." "What kind of family?" "The kind that rides." Frank went pale. Not dramatic movie pale, real pale. The kind of pale that happens when a man who has spent his whole life on one side of the law suddenly realizes he's standing on the other side and can't find his way back. "Tell me you didn't," Frank said. "I had no choice." "There's always a choice. Not this time. Not when they threatened Emily." Frank rubbed his face with both hands. "Ethan, I've spent my entire career putting men like whoever you used to be behind bars. I retired with a clean record and a clear conscience. And now you're telling me that tonight the Hells Angels are going to ride into my town, and you want me to just sit here and drink your terrible coffee while it happens. I want you to go home, Frank. Lock your doors and let me handle this. And if someone gets killed, nobody is getting killed. How can you promise that?" Ethan looked at him, and again Frank saw it. That thing behind the eyes, that ancient, heavy, dangerous something that didn't belong in a bartender. "Because I'm going to be there," Ethan said, "and I don't let people die. That's not who I am. That's never been who I am." Frank shook his head slowly. "Who are you, Ethan? I mean, really, who the hell are you?" "I'm a man who made a promise to his dying wife that he would never go back to the life that killed her. And tonight I'm going to break that promise to protect the people she would have wanted me to protect. That's who I am, Frank, a man caught between two worlds trying to do the right thing in both of them." Frank sat with that for a long moment. Then he reached across the bar and gripped Ethan's forearm. "I'm staying," Frank said. "Frank, no. I'm staying, not as a cop, not as a sheriff, as your friend. Whatever happens tonight, you're not facing it alone. You don't know what you're signing up for. I'm 72 years old, Ethan. I've buried 2 partners, survived 3 shootings, and watched my wife die of Alzheimer's in a nursing home while she looked at me like I was a stranger. There's nothing left in this world that scares me. So stop trying to protect everyone and let someone protect you for once. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't speak for a long moment. When he did, his voice was rough. Thank you, Frank. Don't thank me. Just make sure your biker friends know I'm on the right side. They'll know. The afternoon crawled by like a wounded animal. Every minute felt like 10. Ethan worked the bar, mechanically pouring drinks, wiping counters, making small talk with the handful of customers who wandered in. But his mind was elsewhere. His mind was 15 years in the past, riding through memories he had spent a decade and a half trying to forget. He remembered the night he met Claire, a fundraiser for a children's hospital of all places. The club had been strong-armed into attending by a member's wife who believed bikers should do more than ride and fight. Ethan had stood in the corner, uncomfortable in a world of ties and champagne, and a woman in a blue dress had walked up to him and said, "You look like you'd rather be anywhere else." "Is it that obvious?" he'd said. "You're wearing a leather jacket at a black tie event. So yes." She'd smiled. And something inside Ethan, something he thought had calcified years ago, cracked open. They married 18 months later. For 6 years, she was his anchor. She never asked him to leave the club. She never gave him ultimatums. She simply loved him and waited because Claire understood something most people didn't, that you can't force a man out of darkness. You can only show him the light and trust him to walk toward it. When the cancer diagnosis came, Ethan's world ended. He remembered sitting in the hospital room holding her hand, watching the machines count down her life in numbers and beeps. "Promise me," she had said, "anything. Don't spend the rest of your life fighting battles that destroy your soul." Claire. "Promise me, Ethan, because I know you, I know what you'll do when I'm gone. You'll go back to the only world that makes sense to you and it will eat you alive. Promise me you'll find something else, something peaceful, something that matters. You matter. I won't be here. So find something that matters as much as I do." She'd squeezed his hand. "Promise me." "I promise." She died 3 days later. And Ethan Walker, the man who had never broken his word, not once, not in 20 years of violence and loyalty and impossible situations, kept his promise. He walked away from everything. The club, the brotherhood, the only identity he had ever known. Mac had tried to stop him. The others had tried to stop him. But when a man has lost the only thing worth living for, nothing else has the power to hold him. He drove until he found the most empty, forgotten stretch of highway in Arizona. He bought a broken-down building with a bar inside it. He taught himself to make coffee. He learned to fix chairs and replace light bulbs and talk to strangers about their problems without ever revealing his own. And for 15 years it worked, until last night. At 6:00 p.m., Ethan told Emily to close the bar early. She didn't argue. She helped him stack the chairs, wipe down the tables, and lock the register. When the last customer left, old Ray Patterson, confused but obedient, Emily turned to Ethan. "How long until they get here?" Which they both. "Derek could come any time. Max should be here by midnight." "What do we do until then?" "We wait." "I hate waiting." "Everyone does. That's why it works." At 7:15 p.m., Ethan's phone buzzed. Not the old phone, his regular phone, a number he didn't recognize. He answered. "Hello, Mr. Walker." Derek's voice, calm, controlled, different from last night. This wasn't the cocky punk who had walked into the bar swinging his ego around. This was a man who had spent the day planning. "Derek, I want you to know that what happens tonight is your fault. I gave you a chance. You could have paid the money and kept your little bar, but you had to play hero. I didn't play anything. Tonight I'm bringing 40 men, 40, and when we're done, that Roadhouse won't exist anymore. And everyone inside it, the old sheriff, the blonde waitress, and especially you will understand what happens when someone says no to me. Don't do this, Derek. Walk away. Find another highway. Leave these people alone." "It's too late for that. You embarrass me. In front of my crew, in front of that girl, nobody does that," and walks away. "I'm giving you one last chance, son. One, take it." Derek laughed. "You know what your problem is, old man. You think because you won one fight, you're invincible. But that was 6 against 1. Tonight is 40 against 1, and no amount of bar tricks is going to save you." I told you last night, Ethan said. I won't be alone. Yeah, who's coming? Your poker buddies, your book club. You'll find out. The line went dead. Ethan put the phone down. Emily and Frank were watching him. He's coming tonight, Ethan said. 40 men. 40, Emily's voice cracked. Frank stood up slowly. Ethan, 40 armed men against what you, me, and a waitress. Even with your friends coming, the math is fine, Frank. How is the math fine? Because you don't know how many are coming. How many? Ethan looked at him, and for the first time since Frank had known him in 12 years of coffee and conversation and quiet companionship. Ethan Walker smiled. It was not a warm smile. It was not a friendly smile. It was the smile of a man who had been underestimated for the last time. Enough, Ethan said. At 9:00 p.m., the waiting ended. Headlights appeared on the highway. Not one or two, dozens. They came from the east, a long line of cars and trucks, moving fast, moving with purpose. Derek's army. Emily saw them first. Ethan, I see them. There are so many. I know. Frank checked the weapon. He had brought a service revolver he hadn't fired in 6 years. His hands were steady, old cop hands. They never shake when it matters. If this goes bad, Frank started. It won't. But if it does. Frank, Ethan's voice was steel. It will not go bad. I need you to believe that. The vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Doors opened. Men poured out, young, angry, armed with bats and chains, and the reckless courage of men who had never faced real consequences. Ethan counted. 38. Close enough to 40. Derek stepped out of the lead vehicle. He was wearing the same leather jacket, but tonight he had a gun tucked into his waistband. He didn't try to hide it. He wanted Ethan to see it. Last chance, old man, Derek shouted across the lot. Come out! Bring the money. Maybe I let you keep your teeth. Ethan stepped outside, alone. He stood in front of the Roadhouse with his hands at his sides, facing 38 men, and he didn't move. He didn't flinch. He didn't speak. Derek walked toward him. Where's your army bartender? Where are all these people you said were coming? Ethan said nothing. That's what I thought. Derek turned to his crew. Take it apart. Everything. Break the windows. Break the bar. Break everything inside. The crew surged forward, and then they stopped. Because the sound hit them for anything else. A low, deep rumble, not one engine, not 10 engines, but 100 engines, maybe more, rising from the desert floor like thunder rolling up from the earth itself. The ground trembled. The air vibrated. The headlights on Derek's cars flickered from the sheer vibration. Every man in the parking lot turned to look down the highway, and what they saw froze them in place. The highway had disappeared. From horizon to edge, the road was filled with headlights, a river of light stretching back so far that the end was invisible. The sound grew louder. The rumble became a roar, and out of the darkness they came. Motorcycles, hundreds of motorcycles, riding in perfect formation, 2 by 2, filling both lanes of the highway, their engines shaking the windows of the Roadhouse. Derek's crew stopped moving. Every single one of them. They stood in the parking lot with their bats and chains and watched as the most iconic motorcycle organization in American history rolled toward them like a wall of black leather and chrome. The first riders pulled into the lot, then more, then more. They kept coming and coming and coming until the parking lot overflowed and the bikes lined the highway's shoulder for a quarter mile in both directions. Men climbed off their motorcycles. They weren't young. Most of them were Ethan's age or older, men in their 50s, 60s, even 70s. But they moved with the easy confidence of men who had spent their entire lives in situations exactly like this one. Men who had nothing to prove and nothing to fear. At the front of the formation, a single rider dismounted. He was 65 years old, built like a man who had been forged in a foundry rather than born in a hospital. Silver beard, eyes like black ice. A leather vest with patches that told a story only a handful of people in the world could fully read. Mac. He walked through the crowd of stunned criminals without looking at them. He walked past Derek without a glance. He walked straight to Ethan and stopped. The two men looked at each other. 15 years dissolved in a single moment. You look old, Mac said. You look worse, Ethan said. Mac grabbed him, not a handshake, a hug. The kind of hug that only happens between men who have bled together, buried friends together, and survived things that no civilian could ever understand. Took you long enough to call, Mac said into Ethan's ear. I was hoping I'd never have to. I know, but here we are. Here we are. Mac released him and turned around. For the first time, he looked at Derek Hayes. He studied the young man the way a mechanic studies a broken engine, with mild curiosity and zero respect. "This the kid?" Mac asked. "That's him." Mac took 2 steps toward Derek. The young gang leader was standing perfectly still, his face drained of every shade of color nature had given it. "Son," Mac said, "do you have any idea who that man is?" Derek didn't answer. His mouth was open, but nothing came out. "Let me tell you who that man is. That man walked away from us 15 years ago, and not a single person tried to stop him. You know why? Because Ethan Walker earned more respect in 20 years than most men earn in a lifetime. He protected people. He saved lives. He put himself between this family and every threat that came at us, and he never asked for anything in return. When he left, we let him go because he earned the right to leave, because his wife asked him to, and because every man standing behind me right now loves him enough to give him what he wanted, peace." Mac's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. "And you took that from him. You walked into his home. You threatened his people. You put your hands on that girl. And you forced a man who spent 15 years keeping a promise to his dead wife to pick up a phone and call the one world he swore he'd never return to." Mac leaned in until his face was inches from Derek's. "That's not a mistake, son. That's a death wish." Derek's gun was still in his waistband. His hand twitched toward it. Every Hells Angels member in the parking lot went still at the same time. The silence that followed was the most dangerous sound Derek Hayes had ever heard. "Go ahead," Mac said softly. "Touch it. See what happens." Derek's hand stopped. His breathing was ragged. His crew behind him had collectively taken 3 steps back, leaving him standing alone in front of 300 men who were looking at him the way wolves look at a rabbit that wandered into the wrong meadow. Derek's hand dropped to his side, and the toughest man on Highway 87 did something he had never done before in his life. He looked down at the ground, and he waited for someone else to decide what happened next. Derek Hayes stood in the parking lot of the Silver Canyon Roadhouse with 300 Hells Angels staring at him, and for the first time in his 30 years of living, he understood what fear actually was. Not the fear he sold to gas station owners and small business operators along Highway 87. Not the theatrical intimidation he had perfected over years of shaking down people who couldn't fight back. Real fear, the kind that starts in your stomach and crawls up into your throat and sits there like a stone, making it impossible to breathe, impossible to think, impossible to pretend you're still in control. His crew felt it too. 38 men who had driven out here believing they were about to destroy an old bartender's bar were now standing in a parking lot surrounded by an army they didn't know existed, couldn't have imagined, and had absolutely no plan for. One of Derek's men, a 22-year-old kid named Travis, who had joined the crew 6 months ago because he thought it would make him tough, dropped his baseball bat. The aluminum clattered against the asphalt. In the silence, it sounded like a gunshot. Every Hells Angels member within 20 feet turned to look at him. Travis put his hands up. "I don't want any trouble," he said, his voice cracking like a teenager's. Nobody responded. Nobody needed to. 300 pairs of eyes said everything that needed to be said. Mac turned back to Ethan. "What do you want to do with them?" The question hung in the air. Every person in that parking lot, the bikers, the criminals. Emily, watching from the doorway, Frank Delgado, with his hand resting on his revolver, waited for the answer. Ethan looked at Derek. He studied the young man's face the way you study a road you used to drive, with recognition, with memory, with the uncomfortable awareness that you've been where this person is standing. "How old are you, Derek?" Ethan asked. Derek blinked. Of all the things he expected the bartender to say, that wasn't one of them. "What? Your age? How old? 30. Ethan nodded slowly. "When I was 30, I was exactly where you are right now. Not in this parking lot, but in this moment, standing in front of a choice I didn't know I was making. Thinking I was powerful because people were afraid of me. Thinking fear and respect were the same thing. I don't need a speech from you, old man." "Yes, you do. You just don't know it yet." Mac took a step toward Derek, but Ethan raised a hand. Mac stopped immediately. The gesture was small, just a hand palm out, nothing dramatic, but the fact that a single motion from Ethan Walker could freeze the president of one of the most powerful motorcycle organizations in America told Derek everything he needed to know about who he had picked a fight with. "I'm going to tell you a story," Ethan said, "and you're going to listen, not because I'm asking, because 300 men behind me are going to make sure you listen." Derek swallowed hard. He didn't speak. When I was 28 years old, Ethan began. I walked into a bar in Nevada and told the owner he owed the club money. He was an old man, 60-something, big hands, bad back, kind eyes. He looked at me and said, "Son, I don't owe you anything." And I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him against his own bar and told him that if he didn't pay by Friday, I'd burn his place down. Ethan's voice was steady, but something beneath it trembled. Not fear, not weakness, but the strain of a man pulling something ugly out of the ground with his bare hands. That man's name was George Harlan. He was a Korean War veteran. He had a Purple Heart in a frame behind his bar that I didn't bother to look at. He had a granddaughter who was 6 years old, and every afternoon she came to the bar after school and sat on a stool and did her homework while her grandfather served drinks. And I threatened to burn all of that to ash because someone told me he owed money and I was too young and too stupid and too drunk on my own power to ask whether it was true. Emily had stepped out of the doorway. She was standing just outside the Roadhouse, arms wrapped around herself, listening. "Did he pay?" Derek asked. The question came out before he could stop it. Not defiance, but genuine curiosity. The curiosity of a man hearing his own story told back to him by someone who had already lived through the ending. He didn't have to, because 3 days later, I found out the debt was fake. A rival crew had set us up. They wanted us to destroy an innocent man's business, so we'd look like thugs and the community would turn against us. And if I hadn't taken 5 minutes to actually check the facts, if I had just shown up on Friday the way I promised, I would have destroyed a war hero's life for nothing. Ethan paused. I went back to that bar. I walked in and George was behind the counter, same as always, pouring drinks with those big hands. And when he saw me, he didn't flinch. He didn't run. He looked at me and said, "I figured you'd be back. What'll you have?" Like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't threatened to end his world. He served me a beer. He sat down across from me, and he said, "The difference between a dangerous man and a good man isn't strength. It's what you do with it." Ethan looked at Derek. I never forgot that. And 20 years later, when I was standing behind my own bar, pouring my own drinks, I understood what George was trying to tell me. He wasn't afraid of me. He pitied me because he saw a young man with all the strength in the world and no idea what to do with it except hurt people. And he knew the way old men always know, that someday I would either learn the lesson or the lesson would destroy me. Derek's jaw tightened. His eyes were wet, but he blinked it away fast. His crew was watching. He couldn't break. "You think we're the same," Derek said. "You think I'm going to hear some sad story and just walk away." "No," Ethan said. "I think you're going to hear the truth and then make a choice. That's all anyone can do." Max stepped forward. He hadn't taken his eyes off Derek's crew the entire time Ethan was talking. The old biker president had the situational awareness of a man who had survived 50 years of living on the edge of society, and he had noticed something that Derek hadn't. Derek's crew was fracturing. It was subtle, the kind of thing only a man who had commanded thousands of men over decades would catch. Small shifts in posture, lateral glances, the way 3 or 4 of the younger guys in the back had turned their bodies slightly toward their cars instead of toward the Roadhouse. The body language of men who were calculating the distance to their exits. "Your boys are getting nervous," Max said to Derek. Not mocking, just observational, the way a mechanic points out a crack in an engine block. Derek turned around. What he saw confirmed Max's words. Half his crew wasn't even looking at him anymore. They were looking at the motorcycles, the leather vests, the patches, the faces of men who had been doing this since before most of Derek's crew was born. And in those faces, Derek's men saw something they had never encountered in their short, violent careers. They saw professionals. Not street thugs who watched too many movies. Not internet gangsters who posted tough guy selfies on social media. Professionals. Men who didn't need to raise their voices because their presence said everything. Men who stood with the relaxed confidence of people who had already decided the outcome and were simply waiting for reality to catch up. "Nobody's leaving," Derek said to his crew, turning back around. But his voice lacked conviction, and everyone heard it. A man near the back of Derek's group, mid-20s, wearing a bandana and holding a chain, spoke up. "Derek, man, I didn't sign up for this. You said we were hitting a bar. You didn't say anything about Hell's Angels." "Shut up, Rico. No, I'm serious. This is insane. There's 300 of them and 30 of us, and half of us don't even have weapons. I'm out. You walk away, you're done. You hear me? Done." Rico looked at Derek. Then he looked at the wall of bikers. Then he dropped the chain, turned around, and walked to his car. "Rico!" Derek shouted. Rico didn't stop. He got in his car, started the engine, and drove away. 3 more men followed him within 30 seconds. Then 2 more. Then 5 more. It happened like a dam, breaking one crack, then another, then the whole structure collapsing at once. Derek's crew dissolved in front of his eyes. Men dropped their weapons, muttered apologies, avoided his gaze, and retreated to their vehicles. Car doors slammed, engines turned over, headlights swept across the parking lot and disappeared down the highway. In less than 4 minutes, Derek's army of 38 men became Derek and 7 guys who were either too loyal or too scared to leave. Derek watched them go. His face went through 5 stages of emotion in rapid succession: disbelief, fury, humiliation, desperation, and finally something that looked very much like the loneliness of a man who has just discovered that the loyalty he bought with fear was worth exactly what he paid for it: nothing. "Looks like the math changed," Max said. Derek's remaining 7 men were clustered together, looking at each other, looking at Derek, looking at the bikers. One of them, a big man with a shaved head named Paulie, stepped forward. "Derek, we need to go." "No, Derek, listen to me. We need to go right now, before this gets worse." "It can't get worse, Paulie. Everything I built is standing in that parking lot watching me lose." "Then let it go, man. Let it go and we'll figure it out tomorrow." "There is no tomorrow. You think these guys are going to let us walk away? You think the old man is going to let us just drive off like nothing happened?" Paulie looked at Ethan. "Will you?" Every head turned to the bartender. Ethan Walker stood in the same spot he had been standing in since he walked outside. He hadn't moved. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't clenched a fist or made a threat. He had simply stood there, hands at his sides, and let the situation unfold the way he knew it would. Because this was what Ethan Walker did. This was his gift. Not violence, although he was capable of extraordinary violence. Not intimidation, although his mere presence had just dismantled a criminal crew without a single punch being thrown. His gift was patience. The ability to stand still while chaos swirled around him and wait for the moment when the truth could do more damage than any weapon. "You can all leave," Ethan said. "Every one of you. Highway. Don't come back to any business I've ever heard of. Start over somewhere else. Do something different. That's the offer." Paulie nodded immediately. "Done. We're done." He grabbed 2 of the remaining men by their shoulders and pulled them toward the cars. They went willingly, gratefully. 4 more peeled off. They practically ran, and then there was one. Derek Hayes stood alone in the parking lot of the Silver Canyon Roadhouse, surrounded by 300 Hells Angels, facing the bartender he had humiliated 2 nights ago, and he had absolutely nothing left. No crew, no leverage, no plan, no bravado. Just a 30-year-old man with an expensive jacket and a gun in his waistband, and the slowly dawning realization that he had destroyed his own empire by picking a fight with the wrong person. "It's just you now, Derek," Ethan said quietly. Derek's hand moved toward his waistband, toward the gun. The entire parking lot tensed. 300 men shifted forward by inches. Max's hand went inside his vest. Frank Delgado, standing at the edge of the Roadhouse porch, gripped his revolver. "Don't," Ethan said. One word: calm, final. Derek's hand hovered. His fingers were trembling. His eyes were wild, the eyes of a cornered animal calculating whether to fight or flee, and knowing that neither option ends well. "You think you've won." Derek's voice was raw, broken. "You think because your friends showed up and my guys ran, you've won. Nobody's won anything, Derek. You ruined me. You understand that everything I built, every man who followed me, every deal I had on this highway, it's gone. Because of you. Because some old bartender decided he was too good to pay $1,000 a month. That's not why it's gone. Then why? It's gone because you built it on fear. And fear is the weakest foundation in the world. The first time something scarier shows up, everything you built on fear collapses. That's not my fault. That's architecture." Derek laughed. It was a terrible sound, the laugh of a man who is breaking apart from the inside out. "Architecture," he repeated. "The bartender's giving me a lesson in architecture. The bartender's giving you a lesson in reality. Everything that happened tonight, your crew leaving, your empire falling apart, you standing here alone, none of that happened because of me or because of these men behind me. It happened because the people who followed you never believed in you. They believed in what you could do to them if they didn't obey. And the second something more dangerous appeared, that belief evaporated, because it was never real. Derek's hand was still near his waistband, still hovering, still trembling. Emily's voice came from the doorway. "Derek!" Everyone turned. Emily Carter, the 26-year-old waitress who had been grabbed, threatened, and terrorized 2 nights ago, stepped off the porch and walked into the parking lot. "Emily, get back inside," Ethan said sharply. She ignored him. She walked past Mac, past the rows of bikers, and stopped 10 feet from Derek Hayes. "Don't touch that gun," she said. "Why do you care?" Derek's voice cracked. "I grabbed you. I scared you. I threatened to burn down your job. Why would you care what I do? Because 2 nights ago, when your man Colt grabbed my arm, I looked into your eyes. And you know what I saw?" Derek didn't answer. "Nothing. I saw nothing. You were empty. You weren't enjoying it. You weren't angry. You were just going through the motions of being a bad person because you didn't know how to be anything else. And that scared me more than anything else that happened that night." Derek's lower lip trembled. Just once. Just for a second. "You don't know me," he said. "You're right, I don't. But I know what it looks like when someone is performing, when someone is playing a role because they think it's the only role available to them. I've seen it before. I've done it before. And the man standing behind me spent 20 years of his life doing exactly what you're doing right now, using strength to control people, because he was terrified of what would happen if he stopped. I'm not terrified. Then take your hand off the gun." The parking lot went silent. 300 bikers, one bartender, one retired sheriff, one waitress, and one young man standing at the edge of a cliff that he had built himself, deciding whether to jump. Derek's hand shook. Emily took one step closer. "I'm not going to pretend that what you did was okay. You hurt people. You scared people. You destroyed their property and stole their money and made them feel helpless. That's real. That happened. And there need to be consequences for that. So what, you're going to lecture me until I cry?" "No, I'm going to tell you something that Ethan told me 3 years ago when I showed up at this bar with nothing. No money, no plan, no idea what I was doing with my life." She paused. "He said the worst thing you can do is let the worst thing that happened to you become the best excuse you've ever had." I didn't understand it then. I do now. Derek looked at her, really looked at her, and something shifted in his face, the mask cracking just enough to show the human being underneath. Not a gang leader, not a tough guy, a 30-year-old man who had been running from something his entire life and had finally run out of road. His hand dropped from his waistband. It fell to his side and hung there limp. "Okay," he whispered. "Just that. Just okay." Mac moved fast. Before Derek could change his mind, Mac stepped forward, reached into Derek's waistband, and pulled out the gun. He ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber, and handed the pieces to a biker behind him. The whole operation took less than 3 seconds. Derek didn't resist. Ethan walked forward. He stopped in front of Derek and looked at the young man who 48 hours ago had called him an old man, a nobody, a bartender who couldn't fight his way out of a wet paper bag. "Sit down," Ethan said. Derek looked around. There were no chairs. "On the ground," Ethan said. "Just sit." Derek sat right there in the parking lot on the asphalt with 300 bikers watching. He sat down and put his head in his hands and breathed. Ethan sat down across from him, cross-legged on the pavement, like two men having a conversation on a park bench instead of in the middle of a confrontation that could have ended in bloodshed. "Tell me how you got here," Ethan said. "What? How did a 30-year-old kid end up running a protection racket on a highway in Arizona? Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to do that. Something happened. Something pushed you onto this road. Tell me what it was." Derek looked at Ethan like he was insane. "You want my life story? Now, in the middle of this, I'm not going anywhere. Neither are you. Talk." Derek stared at the ground. For a long time, the only sound was the ticking of motorcycle engines cooling in the night air. "My father," Derek said finally. "My father ran crews in Phoenix. He was good at it, or at least I thought he was good at it. He made money. He had men who respected him. He had a reputation. And when I was 12 years old, he told me, the world is divided into 2 kinds of people, the ones who take and the ones who get taken from. And if you're not one, you're the other." Ethan nodded slowly. "And you believed him?" "He was my father. Of course I believed him." "Where is he now?" Derek's jaw clenched. "Dead. Shot by one of his own men when I was 19. The guy who killed him took over his crew, took over his territory, took everything he'd built, and nobody did anything about it. Nobody cared. Because my father built everything on fear, just like you said. And when he was gone, the fear went with him. So you started over. I started over. Different city, different highway, same game, because it was the only game I knew. Ethan leaned forward. And how's it working out? Derek looked up. His eyes were red. I'm sitting on the ground in a parking lot surrounded by Hell's Angels, and every man I trusted just drove away. How do you think it's working out? It's working out exactly the way it worked out for your father, and exactly the way it worked out for me. Because fear has the same ending every time, Derek. Every single time. You lose the people who follow you, you lose the life you built. And you end up alone wondering what went wrong when the answer was right there from the beginning. Which is what? You can't build anything real on a foundation that only works when people are afraid of you. The second the fear is gone, everything built on top of it falls. Your father knew that. He just learned it too late. I knew it. I almost learned it too late. You're learning it right now. The question is, are you going to be smarter than your old man? Derek's breathing hitched. Something was breaking inside him. Not his ego, not his pride, but something deeper. The narrative. The story he had been telling himself for 11 years about who he was and why he did what he did. The story his father wrote for him before he died. The story that said the world was divided into takers and the taken, and the only way to survive was to be the one holding the bat. That story was falling apart. I don't know how to be anything else, Derek said. And for the first time, his voice was honest, stripped of performance, stripped of the character he played. Just a man admitting a truth he had never spoken out loud. That's the first real thing you've said since you walked into my bar, Ethan said. Mac had been watching this exchange silently. The old biker president had seen a lot of things in 50 years of riding violence, loyalty, betrayal, death, but he had rarely seen what was happening right now. A man who had every right to destroy another man's life, choosing instead to save it. Ethan, Mac said quietly, stepping forward. We need to talk. Privately. Ethan looked up at his old friend. Now. Ethan stood. He looked down at Derek. Stay here, don't move. Derek didn't move. Ethan and Mac walked to the far edge of the parking lot out of earshot of everyone else. Mac's face was hard, not angry, concerned. The face of a man carrying information that was about to change everything. What is it? Ethan asked. Before we rode out here, I did some homework on your boy Derek. And he's in deeper than you think. The protection racket is the surface. Underneath, he's running drugs through this corridor, meth mostly. He's got a supply line that runs from Phoenix to Flagstaff, and this highway is his distribution route. Every business he's shaking down isn't just paying for protection, they're storage points. He's using their back rooms, their basements, their parking lots to stash product. Ethan's face went still. How do you know this? Because we've been watching him for 6 months. One of our guys in Phoenix tipped us off. Derek's operation started cutting into territory that belongs to people we do business with. We were already planning to deal with it. You just moved up the timeline. Deal with it how? Mac looked at him. How do you think, Mac? Don't Mac me. This kid isn't just a punk shaking down bars. He's a drug runner. He's using this highway as a pipeline, and the people he's connected to in Phoenix are not the kind of people who negotiate. So what are you telling me? I'm telling you that if we walk away tonight, if we let this kid go, he doesn't just go back to running protection. He goes back to moving meth through communities that include our families. Our grandchildren live in some of these towns, Ethan. My granddaughter goes to school in Scottsdale. This isn't abstract. Ethan absorbed this. His face didn't change, but Mac, who had known him for 35 years, saw the shift behind his eyes. The calculation, the moral algebra of a man weighing mercy against responsibility. You said you've been gathering information on him, Ethan said. 6 months worth. Financial records, distribution schedules, names, dates, drop points, everything. Who else knows? Just us and a very patient ATF agent named Diane Torres, who has been building a federal case against the Phoenix suppliers for 2 years and needs someone to connect the dots between the supply and the distribution. Ethan stared at Mac. You've been working with the feds. Times change, brother. We're not the same club we were 20 years ago. We've got businesses, legitimate ones, charities, community programs. Half our members are grandfathers. We've spent the last decade trying to change how people see us, and some punk running meth through our backyard threatens all of it. So you want to hand Derek to the feds? I want to hand Derek's operation to the feds. Every supplier, every buyer, every dollar, the whole chain. And Derek, that depends on you. Ethan turned and looked back at the young man sitting on the asphalt in the middle of the parking lot. Derek hadn't moved. He was still sitting with his head in his hands, surrounded by 300 men who could end his life with a word from the man he had called a helpless old bartender. He's a kid Mac. He's a 30-year-old drug runner who threatened to burn down your bar with the people inside it. He's a kid whose father taught him that the world was made of predators and prey, and he chose to be a predator because nobody ever showed him a third option. Max studied Ethan for a long moment. You want to save him. I want to give him a chance. The same chance someone gave me. Who gave you a chance? George Harlan, a bartender in Nevada who served me a beer after I threatened to destroy his life. And Claire, who looked at a man in a leather jacket and saw someone worth loving. Mac exhaled slowly through his nose. You know what this means. If we hand the evidence to the feds and Derek cooperates, testifies against his suppliers, he's going to prison. Not forever, but years. And when he gets out, he'll have nothing. He has nothing now. At least in prison, he'll have time to figure out who he is without his father's voice in his head telling him who to be. Max shook his head slowly. 15 years behind a bar and you're still the same man, still trying to protect people who don't deserve it. Everyone deserves a chance, Mac, even the ones who scare us, especially the ones who scare us, because the ones who scare us are usually the ones who are most afraid. Mac put his hand on Ethan's shoulder. Your wife really did fix you, didn't she? She didn't fix me. She showed me what I could be. That's not the same thing. Close enough. They walked back. Ethan knelt in front of Derek. The young man looked up, and in his eyes, Ethan saw something he recognized. The exhaustion of a man who has been carrying a weight too heavy for his body for too long with no one to help. I'm going to offer you something, Ethan said, and you're going to listen before you respond. Okay. My friends have evidence, 6 months worth. Everything you've been doing on this highway, not just the shakedowns, but the other things, the things you thought nobody knew about. Derek's face went white. How? It doesn't matter how. What matters is what happens next. There are two options. Option one, this evidence goes to the ATF and they come after you and everyone connected to you. Your suppliers in Phoenix, your buyers, everyone, and you go down with them hard. Federal charges, federal prison, and the people you work for in Phoenix, the people who supplied you, they will assume you talked. And you know what happens to people they think talked. Derek's hands were shaking. What's option two? Option two, you cooperate voluntarily. You walk into the ATF office with a lawyer and you tell them everything. Names, dates, routes, drop points. You help them take down the supply chain. And in exchange, you get a reduced sentence. You do your time. And when you get out, you start over. Really start over. Not your father's version, yours. That's not a choice. That's two kinds of prison. No, Derek. One is prison with a future. The other is prison with a target on your back for the rest of your life. And I'm not going to tell you which one to pick. But I'll tell you this, I had the same choice 20 years ago. Walk away and start over, or stay and let the life destroy me. I chose to walk away, and it was the hardest thing I ever did. Harder than any fight, harder than any confrontation, harder than sitting in a parking lot surrounded by men who could crush me. Derek looked at him. Why do you care? I threatened your people. I grabbed your waitress. I came back with 40 men to destroy your bar. Why would you help me? Ethan put his hand on Derek's shoulder, the same way Claire had put her hand on his 30 years ago in a hospital room asking him to promise. Because someone helped me once, and the only way to repay that debt is to pass it forward. Derek broke. Not dramatically, not with sobs or screams or falling apart. He broke the way men break when they are exhausted and alone and someone offers them something they have never been offered before. He broke quietly, a few tears, a shaking breath, a nod so small it was almost invisible. Okay, Derek said, I'll cooperate. Max stepped forward. I'll make the call. Frank Delgado, who had been standing on the porch the entire time watching everything walk down to the parking lot. He stopped in front of Ethan and looked at him with an expression that combined professional admiration personal wonder in the deep unease of a man who had just watched every assumption he had about right and wrong get rearranged. Ethan, Frank said. Frank, in 41 years of law enforcement, I never saw anyone do what you just did. What did I do? You won a war without firing a shot. You dismantled a criminal organization without breaking a law. And you convinced a man who came here to destroy you to turn himself in voluntarily. Frank shook his head. They should teach this at the academy. They should teach it earlier than that, Ethan said. Emily stood at the edge of the parking lot, arms still wrapped around herself, watching it all. When Ethan looked at her, she gave him a small, tired smile. You okay? He asked. I think so. Are you? Ethan looked around the parking lot, at Mac already on the phone with the ATF contact, at Derek still sitting on the ground staring at his hands, at 300 Hells Angels standing in the Arizona darkness, having ridden through the night for a man who had walked away from them 15 years ago. No, Ethan said honestly, but I will be. Emily walked over and stood beside him. Not in front of him, not behind him, beside him, the way Claire used to stand. You broke your promise to her, Emily said softly. You called them. You went back to the old world. I know. Was it worth it? Ethan watched Mac talking on the phone. He watched Derek's face slowly transforming from something shattered into something that might someday, with enough time and enough pain and enough honesty, become whole. She told me not to fight battles that destroy my soul, Ethan said. But this battle didn't destroy anything. This battle built something. I think she would have understood the difference. I think she would have been proud of you. Ethan's throat tightened. He didn't trust his voice, so he just nodded. And in that moment, standing in a parking lot, surrounded by the family he left behind, with the girl he'd sworn to protect, standing beside him, Ethan Walker realized something he had spent 15 years trying to understand. Claire's promise was never about avoiding conflict. It was about choosing which battles were worth fighting and protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, whether it was a waitress, an old sheriff, a gas station owner, or even a broken young man who came looking for a fight and found something he didn't know he needed that was always worth fighting for, that was always worth breaking a promise for. Mac walked back. Torres is sending a team. They'll be here by morning. She says if Derek's information checks out, she can offer federal protection and a reduced sentence, 5 to 7 years instead of 20. Ethan nodded. There's one more thing, Mac said. What? Mac reached into his vest and pulled out a patch. Old leather. Faded colors. The edges worn soft from years of being carried. Ethan recognized it immediately. It was his patch, the one he had surrendered 15 years ago, the night he walked away from the club, the night he gave back his vest and his colors and his identity and drove into the desert to become nobody. I've been carrying this since the day you left, Mac said, waiting for the right time to give it back. Ethan looked at the patch. His hands didn't move. I'm not that man anymore, Mac. I know. That's why you deserve to have it. Not to wear, just to remember. Remember who you were. And remember that the man who wore this patch, the man who protected his brothers, who fought for his family, who never turned his back on someone in need, that man didn't disappear when you took off the leather. He just found a different bar to stand behind. Ethan took the patch. He held it in both hands and looked at it, the weight of another lifetime pressed into worn leather and thread. Thank you, brother, Ethan said. Always, Mac said. And the two men stood together in the dark the way they had stood together 1,000 times before, in 100 different parking lots on 100 different nights, with the sound of motorcycle engines cooling around them and the vast Arizona sky spreading overhead like a blanket thrown over a world that was for this one fragile moment exactly as it should be. The ATF arrived at 6:47 in the morning. 3 black SUVs pulled into the parking lot of the Silver Canyon Roadhouse. Moving slow, deliberate the way, federal vehicles always move like they own whatever ground they roll across. Most of the Hells Angels had already gone. Mac had sent them home in waves throughout the night, groups of 20 and 30, peeling off into the darkness, their engines fading down the highway until the desert swallowed the sound. By the time the sun cracked the horizon, only Mac and 6 of his closest men remained standing near their bikes, drinking coffee that Emily had made, because Ethan's hands had finally started shaking and he didn't want anyone to see. 15 years of steady hands, 15 years of control, and now at 6 in the morning, with the hardest night of his second life behind him, Ethan Walker's body was finally admitting what his mind had refused to acknowledge. I was exhausted, not physically. He could go another 12 hours, another 24 if he had to. The exhaustion was deeper than muscle and bone. It was the exhaustion of a man who had opened a door he swore he'd never open again, and was now standing in the doorway looking at both sides of his life, at once unable to step fully into either one. Emily noticed. Of course she noticed. She noticed everything about Ethan the same way daughters notice things about their fathers that no one else catches. "Sit down," she said, placing a cup of coffee in front of him. "I'm fine." "You're shaking." "It's cold." "Ethan, it's Arizona in July. Sit down." He sat. He wrapped his hands around the mug and held it tight, using the warmth to steady himself. Emily sat across from him and said nothing. She just sat there, present, patient. The way Claire used to sit with him after a bad night, not asking, not pushing, just being there so he didn't have to be alone with whatever was eating him. "You remind me of her too much," Ethan said quietly. "I know," Emily said. "You've never said it out loud, but I know." The front door opened. A woman walked in, mid-40s, dark hair pulled into a tight bun, wearing a navy blue blazer over a white shirt and the kind of flat practical shoes that said she expected to be on her feet for the next 16 hours. She had a badge clipped to her belt and eyes that moved across a room the way security cameras do, systematic, missing nothing. "Ethan Walker," she said. "That depends on who's asking." "Special Agent Diane Torres, ATF. Your friend Mac called me." Ethan looked past her to the parking lot where Mac was already talking to two federal agents near the SUVs. Mac caught his eye and gave a small nod. "It's okay. She's the one." "Sit down, Agent Torres," Ethan said. "Coffee." "Please." Emily poured her a cup. Torres took a sip, paused, and looked at the mug with an expression that suggested she was reconsidering several life choices. "That's, terrible," Emily said. "We know." Torres set the mug down and opened a folder she'd been carrying under her arm. "Mr. Walker, I'm going to be direct with you because I've been working this case for 2 years and I have very little patience for small talk. Your friend Mac has provided my office with 6 months of intelligence on Derek Hayes' operation, financial records, distribution schedules, names of suppliers in Phoenix, routes, drop points. It's the most comprehensive package of evidence I've received on this corridor since I started the investigation." "Mac's thorough," Ethan said. "Mac's a criminal informant who should probably be in prison himself, but that's a conversation for another day." Torres folded her hands on the table. "What I need from you is cooperation. You're the nexus point. Hayes targeted your establishment. The confrontation happened here. Your testimony ties the extortion to the drug operation. Without you, I've got evidence but no story, and federal juries need stories. I'm not a witness, Agent Torres. I'm a bartender." Torres looked at him for a long moment. Then she reached into her folder and pulled out a photograph. She slid it across the counter. Ethan looked at it. His face didn't change, but his hands tightened around the coffee mug. The photograph showed a younger version of himself, not the bar owner version, not the peaceful man in Arizona version. The other version, leather vest, club patches, standing next to Mac and a dozen other men at what appeared to be a motorcycle rally. He was maybe 40 in the photo, strong, alert, the kind of man who walked into a room and the temperature changed. "I know who you are, Mr. Walker," Torres said. "Or who you were. I've known for about 8 months, ever since Mac first reached out to my office and mentioned your name. Your ATF file is sealed, and I mean sealed, the kind of sealed that requires 3 signatures from people above my pay grade. But I have colleagues who remember. They remember a man named Ethan Walker who was so valuable to federal law enforcement that when he wanted out, the government gave him a new life instead of a cell. That was a long time ago." "It was, and I have no interest in reopening old cases or disturbing whatever arrangement you made with my predecessors. But I need your help, not as a former member of any organization, as the man Derek Hayes tried to extort, as the owner of this business, as a witness." Ethan stared at the photograph on the counter. The man in the picture stared back at him, younger, harder, unbroken. A man who hadn't yet lost Claire. A man who hadn't yet learned that the strongest thing a person can do is put down the weapon and pick up the dish rag. "Where's Derek now?" Ethan asked. "In one of our vehicles. We took him into custody 20 minutes ago. He's cooperating. Fully. He's already given us 3 names in Phoenix that we've been trying to identify for 18 months. "Is he scared?" Torres paused. "Yes, he's terrified. He knows what happens to people who cooperate against the Phoenix suppliers. These are not forgiving men. What kind of protection can you offer him? Tora's expression shifted. Not much. He was too trained for dramatic reactions, but Ethan caught the flicker of surprise. You're asking about his protection, the man who came here to destroy your business and threatened your people. I'm asking about a 30-year-old kid who's about to put his life on the line to do the right thing. Yes, I'm asking about his protection. Tora studied Ethan for what felt like a long time. Then something in her face softened just at the edges, just enough to show that underneath the federal agent was a human being who recognized something rare when she saw it. We can offer witness protection during the trial. Federal marshals, safe house, new identity afterward if he wants it. The same package we offered you 20 years ago. And his sentence, if his cooperation is as valuable as it looks and based on what he's given us in the last hour, it's going to be very valuable. I can recommend 3 to 5 years. Federal minimum security. He'll be out before he's 35. That's the best you can do. Mr. Walker, the man, ran a drug distribution network across 3 counties. 3 to 5 is generous. The alternative is 15 to 20. Ethan nodded slowly. I'll testify. Torres blinked. Just like that. Just like that. But I have conditions. I'm listening. First, my name stays sealed. Whatever arrangement I had with your predecessors stays in place. I don't appear in any public record, any court filing, any press release. I testify behind closed doors. That can be arranged. Second, Emily Carter, my employee, is left completely out of this. She's not a witness. She's not a person of interest. Her name doesn't appear anywhere in your files. Torres glanced at Emily, who was standing behind the counter, pretending not to listen. She was present during the extortion. Her testimony could. She's 26 years old and she's been through enough. Find another way. Torres considered this. Fine, her name stays out. Third, when Derek gets out, whenever that is, I want to know. I want a phone call. Not from him. From you. I want to know where he lands and whether he's okay. Torres stared at him. You want me to personally monitor the post-release status of a man who threatened to burn down your bar? Yes. Why, Pio? Because someone needs to make sure he actually starts over, not just goes through the motions, actually starts over. And in my experience, the only time people truly change is when someone is paying attention. Torres closed her folder. She looked at Ethan, then at Emily, then at Mac through the window, then back at Ethan. Mr. Walker, in 14 years with the ATF, I have never had a victim advocate for the person who victimized them. Maybe that's part of the problem. Torres stood up. She extended her hand. Ethan shook it. I'll be in touch, she said. We'll need your formal statement within the week. I'll send someone out to take it here. No need for you to come to the office. I appreciate that. Torres walked toward the door, then stopped. She turned back. The sealed file. The one with your old life in it. I read enough to know that what you did for the government, the information you provided, the operations you helped dismantle saved lives. A lot of lives. I just wanted you to know that someone in the agency remembers. Ethan didn't respond. Torres nodded once and left. The door closed behind her. Emily exhaled. That was intense. That was Tuesday, Ethan said and took a sip of his terrible coffee. Frank Delgado had been sitting in his booth the entire time Torres was there. He hadn't said a word, hadn't moved, hadn't done anything to draw attention to himself. Old cop instincts, when the feds are talking, you shut up and listen. But now that Torres was gone, he stood up, walked to the bar, and sat down on the stool closest to Ethan. ATF, Frank said. ATF, Ethan confirmed. Sealed file. Yes. Government informant. Ethan looked at him. Cooperating witness. There's a difference. Is there? The difference is that I didn't betray anyone. I gave the government information about outside threats, rival organizations, drug networks, arms dealers that were endangering our communities. I never gave up a single brother. Not one. And when it was over, I walked away with a clean record and a new name and the understanding that my past was buried forever. Frank absorbed this. So you were a good guy inside a bad world. I was a complicated guy inside a complicated world. Good and bad don't apply the way you think they do, Frank. I did things I'm not proud of. I also did things that saved lives. Sometimes the same action was both. The world isn't clean. It never has been. And Claire knew all this. Claire knew everything, every secret, every sin, every ugly, complicated truth. and she loved me anyway. That's why losing her broke me in ways that 15 years of violence never could. Because the violence was external. It happened to my body, to my hands, to the world around me. But losing Claire happened to my soul, and souls don't heal the way bones do. Frank put his hand on the counter. I owe you an apology. For what? For 12 years of thinking you were just a bartender. For 12 years of sitting in this booth, drinking your terrible coffee, telling you about my problems, and never once asking about yours. I was a detective for 41 years, Ethan. I was trained to see through people, and you fooled me completely. I wasn't trying to fool you. I was trying to be the person Claire asked me to be, and that person was a bartender. Simple as that. Nothing about you is simple. Everything about me is simple, Frank. I loved a woman. I lost her. I made a promise. I kept it for 15 years. And when someone threatened the people I care about, I did what any man would do. I called for help. There's nothing complicated about any of that. Frank shook his head slowly. You are the most stubborn man I've ever met. Claire said the same thing. She considered it my best quality. Mac came inside an hour later after the ATF vehicles had pulled away with Derek in the backseat of the lead SUV. The old biker president looked tired, the kind of tired that shows in the shoulders, not the face. He'd ridden through the night, managed 300 men, negotiated with federal agents, and done it all while carrying the weight of a brotherhood that had changed more in the last 20 years than most organizations change in a century. He sat down at the bar. Emily put a cup of coffee in front of him without being asked. Mac took a sip. His face went through the same journey Torres's had: surprise, confusion, mild horror. This is the worst coffee I've ever had, Mac said. Everyone says that, Emily replied. They're right. Mac and Ethan sat in silence for a while. The Roadhouse was empty except for them, Emily and Frank. The morning sun was pushing through the windows, laying warm stripes across the counter. How many rode last night? Ethan asked. 312. From where? Everywhere: California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, New Mexico. I made one phone call, and within 4 hours, every chapter within 500 miles was on the road. Why? Mac looked at him. You're asking why 300 men rode through the night for a bartender in Arizona. I'm asking why 300 men rode through the night for a man who walked away from them 15 years ago without looking back. Mac set down his coffee. He turned on his stool until he was facing Ethan directly. Let me tell you something, brother. Something I should have told you 15 years ago when you handed back your vest and drove away. The night you left after you were gone, I called a meeting. Every officer in the chapter. I stood in front of them and I said, Ethan Walker just did the hardest thing any of us will ever see. He loves something more than the club, and he chose it. And if any man in this room has a problem with that, he can turn in his patch right now, because a brotherhood that can't respect a man who walks away for love isn't a brotherhood worth being part of. Ethan's jaw tightened. Nobody turned in a patch, Mac continued. Not one. Because every man in that room knew what you had been through. They knew about Claire. They knew what she meant to you, and they knew that the man who had protected them, fought for them, bled for them for 20 years was leaving because the woman he loved asked him to, and not a single one of them was small enough to hold that against you. I didn't know that, Ethan said. His voice was rough. Because you didn't call, you didn't write, you disappeared. And I let you because I knew you needed to. But every year on Claire's birthday, I sent you that message. Every year. Not because I thought you'd answer, but because I wanted you to know that the door was still open, that the family was still here, that you were still one of us even if you never wore the leather again. Ethan's eyes were wet. He didn't wipe them. He didn't turn away. He sat there at his own bar at 7 in the morning and let the tears come. Emily watched from behind the counter. She had never seen Ethan cry. In 3 years, she had never seen him show any emotion beyond mild amusement and quiet concern. She had assumed he was simply built that way, a man without peaks or valleys, steady as the desert floor. Now she understood. He wasn't built that way. He had made himself that way. Brick by brick, year by year, he had constructed a wall between himself and his emotions so thick that nothing could get through. And Mac had just put a crack in it with a story about 300 men riding through the night because they loved him. I don't deserve that, Ethan said. Shut up, Mac said. I left. I walked away. I didn't. I said, shut up. You don't get to decide what you deserve. That's not how family works. Family doesn't keep a ledger. Family doesn't track who called and who didn't, who showed up and who disappeared. Family shows up when it matters. 312 men showed up last night. That's the only math that counts. Ethan put his head down on the counter just for a moment, just long enough to breathe. Then he lifted it, wiped his face with the back of his hand, and looked at his oldest friend. Thank you, Mac. Don't thank me. Buy me breakfast. Something that doesn't taste like this coffee. Emily laughed. It broke the tension like a window opening in a stuffy room. I can make eggs, she offered. Can she cook? Mac asked Ethan. Better than I ever could. That's a low bar. Everything about me is a low bar. That's the secret to happiness, Mac. Keep the bar low enough and everything's a pleasant surprise. Mac laughed. A real laugh, the kind that comes from the belly and shakes the shoulders. Frank laughed too from his booth. Even Emily, cracking eggs into a pan, laughed. And for a brief, fragile moment, the Silver Canyon Roadhouse felt like something it hadn't felt like in a long time. A home. Mac left that afternoon. His 6 men mounted their bikes and waited on the highway while Mac stood in front of the Roadhouse with Ethan. I'll be back, Mac said. Not in 15 years. Soon. I'll ride out once a month. Drink your terrible coffee. Make sure nobody else is stupid enough to mess with you. You don't need to do that. I know I don't need to. I want to, and I'm going to. So stop arguing with me and accept it. Ethan nodded. Once a month. Once a month. They embraced. Tight, long. The way brothers do when they know the ride home is far and the world is uncertain, and the only thing that matters is the bond between 2 men who have survived enough to know how rare it is. Mac mounted his bike. He fired the engine. The sound filled the parking lot, deep, powerful, alive. One more thing, Mac called out over the rumble. What? Fix your neon sign. A man can't find this place after dark. Ethan watched him ride away. He watched until the sound was gone and the highway was empty and the dust had settled. Then he went back inside and started washing dishes. 2 days passed, then 3, then a week. The Roadhouse reopened. Customers returned cautiously at first, then with growing confidence, then with outright curiosity. Word had spread. Not the full story. The desert has a way of filtering truth through gossip until only the most dramatic parts survive, but enough. Enough to know that something had happened at the Silver Canyon Roadhouse that involved the bartender and a large number of motorcycles and a young criminal who was now in federal custody. People looked at Ethan differently now. He felt it every time he poured a drink or wiped down the counter. Their eyes lingered a beat longer. Their conversations quieted when he walked past. Not in fear and wonder. The same wonder the regulars had shown after the incident with the drunk trucker 3 years ago, but amplified, deepened, like they were all trying to reconcile the quiet man behind the bar with whatever they had heard happen that night. Ethan hated it. I didn't want to be looked at. He didn't want to be wondered about. He wanted to be invisible again, the old bartender who poured drinks and fixed chairs and listened to problems. That was the man Claire had asked him to become. That was the man he wanted to remain. But he couldn't unring the bell. He couldn't make 300 motorcycles disappear from collective memory. He couldn't erase the story. Emily handled it better than he did. She had always been good with people, warm, funny, quick with a joke, and she used that skill to deflect the questions, redirect the curiosity, and protect Ethan's privacy the way he had always protected hers. Is it true your boss is a biker? A trucker asked her one afternoon. My boss is a 60-year-old man who drinks bad coffee and watches Jeopardy. Does that sound like a biker to you? I heard Hell's Angels came here, hundreds of them. Mister, if hundreds of Hell's Angels showed up at this bar, I wouldn't be standing here serving you nachos. I'd be in another state changing my name. The trucker laughed. Emily smiled. And behind the counter, Ethan silently added another entry to the long mental list of reasons he was grateful this girl had wandered into his life with a busted taillight and empty pockets. 3 weeks after the confrontation, Ethan received a call from Agent Torres. Derek is cooperating fully, as she said. His information has led to 14 arrests in Phoenix. We've seized over $2 million in assets and shut down 3 distribution points. It's the biggest bust on this corridor in a decade. How is he? He's frightened. He's in protective custody. He understands the gravity of what he's done and what he's facing. Is he safe? As safe as we can make him. That's not an answer. Mr. Walker, I've been doing this for 14 years. I don't make promises I can't keep. He's in a secure facility with federal marshals. Nobody from the Phoenix organization knows where he is. But you know as well as I do that safe is a relative term, and when you're testifying against the people he's testifying against. If anything happens to him, nothing is going to happen to him, not on my watch. Ethan paused. You said that like you mean it. I do mean it. Because after meeting you, Mr. Walker, I realized something. In 14 years of doing this job, I have never once thought about what happens to these people after they cooperate. I take their information, I use it to build cases. I put bad people in prison, and then I move on. I never ask about their protection, their future, their psychological state. They're assets to me, tools, means to an end. And now a 60-year-old bartender asked me to make sure a criminal who threatened his life gets a fair shot at redemption, and I realized I've been doing this job wrong. Ethan almost smiled. You're not doing it wrong, Agent Torres. You're doing it the way the system taught you. The system just doesn't always teach the right lessons. Clearly. Can I write to him, Derek? That's highly irregular. I know. Torres sighed. I'll arrange it. Letters only. Screened. Nothing that references the case or any witnesses. Thank you. Mr. Walker. Yes. The man in that sealed file, the one who cooperated with us 20 years ago. I'm beginning to understand why my predecessors went to such lengths to protect him. The call ended. Ethan put the phone down and stared at the wall behind the bar. The wall where, if you look at closely, you could see a tiny nail hole. The place where 15 years ago, on his first night in the building, he had hung Claire's photograph. He'd taken it down after a year because looking at it every day was too much. But the hole remained, a small imperfection in the plaster. A reminder that this wall, like Ethan himself, had once held something precious and had learned to carry the absence. He wrote to Derek that evening. He sat at the counter after closing with Emily's good pen and a sheet of paper from the printer behind the register, and he wrote. He didn't plan the words. He didn't draft or edit or second guess. He just wrote the way he spoke, direct, spare, honest. Derek, you don't know me. Not really. You know the bartender who took your knife and the old man who called 300 bikers to his parking lot. But that's not who I am. Who I am is a man who spent 20 years doing exactly what you did, using fear to control people, using strength to take from the weak, using the excuse of family to justify every terrible thing I did. And I'm writing to you because nobody wrote to me. When I was at my lowest, when the woman I loved was dying and my whole life was falling apart, nobody sat me down and told me the truth. I had to figure it out on my own, and it almost killed me. So here's the truth, as clear as I can make it. You are not your father. His choices are not your destiny. His voice in your head telling you that the world is divided into predators and prey is a lie. The world is divided into people who build and people who destroy, and every single day you get to choose which one you are. You chose destruction because it was all you knew. Now you know something different. What you do with that knowledge is up to you. I'll be here when you get out. The coffee is terrible, but the chair is yours if you want it. Ethan. He folded the letter, put it in an envelope, and addressed it to the P.O. box Agent Torres had provided. Then he turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked out into the Arizona night. He stood in the parking lot where 3 weeks ago, 300 men had stood for him. The asphalt was empty now. The tire marks had faded. The desert had already begun reclaiming the space the way the desert always does, patient, relentless, indifferent to human drama. Ethan pulled Claire's photograph from his wallet. He looked at it in the moonlight, at her face, her smile, the kindness in her eyes that had saved him from himself. I think I finally understand what you meant, he said. You didn't ask me to stop fighting. You asked me to stop fighting battles that destroy my soul. And tonight, sitting at that counter, writing a letter to a kid who tried to ruin my life, I didn't feel destroyed. I felt like I was doing exactly what you would have done. I felt like I was finally becoming the man you saw when you looked at me. He put the photograph away. I love you, Claire. I will always love you, and I'll keep my promise. Not the way I thought I would, not by hiding, not by pretending, not by burying everything I am behind a bar and a bad pot of coffee. I'll keep it by being the man you believed I could be. Even when it's hard, even when it means opening doors I swore I'd keep closed, even when it means sitting on the ground with someone who hates me and showing him that there's another way. He looked up at the sky. A million stars the way there always are in the desert, far from the city lights and the noise. That's the promise, he said. The real one. Not don't fight. Fight, but fight for something worth fighting for. Fight for the people who can't fight for themselves. Fight for the kid who never had anyone show him what strength really looks like. He walked to his truck. He opened the door. On the passenger seat was the old leather patch Mac had given him, the one he'd carried for 15 years waiting. Ethan picked it up. He looked at it one more time. Then he opened the glove compartment, placed the patch inside next to Claire's photograph and closed it. Two pieces of his past. Two pieces of who he was. Together in the dark where they belonged. He drove home. The highway was empty. The night was quiet. And somewhere in a federal facility in another state, a 30-year-old man named Derek Hayes was reading a letter from a bartender and crying for the second time in his adult life. Not because he was afraid, because for the first time in his life, someone believed he could be better. And that belief, fragile and improbable, and offered freely by a man who had every reason to withhold it, was the most terrifying and beautiful thing Derek Hayes had ever received, because it meant he had no more excuses. And he had never lived in a world without excuses before. The letter came back 11 days later. Ethan was behind the counter, same as every morning, wiping down the same wooden surface with the same dish rag, when Emily walked in holding the mail. She sorted through it the way she always did bills. Junk, a postcard from a tourist who had passed through 6 months ago and still remembered the pie, and then she stopped. Ethan, he looked up. Emily was holding a white envelope with a federal return address and no name. That's for me, Ethan said. Emily handed it over without asking. She had learned in the weeks since the confrontation to recognize the moments when Ethan needed space. This was one of them. Ethan took the envelope behind the bar. He didn't open it immediately. He held it in his hands and felt the weight of it heavier than his own letter had been, which meant Derek had written more than Ethan expected. He wasn't sure if that was a good sign or a bad one. He opened it. The handwriting was messy, not uneducated, but rushed the handwriting of a man who had too many thoughts and not enough practice putting them on paper. Mr. Walker, I've started this letter 9 times. Every time I get a few lines in, I throw it away because it sounds fake. It sounds like the kind of thing a man writes when he's trying to impress someone, and I'm done impersonating. So I'm just going to say what's true and hope it's enough. I hate you. I want you to know that first because it's honest. I hate you because you took everything from me in one night. Not just my crew or my operation or my freedom. You took the story I told myself about who I was. You took the thing that got me out of bed every morning, the belief that I was strong, that I was in control, that I was the one people feared. You took that and you crushed it in a parking lot while 300 men watched. And then you did something worse. You sat on the ground with me and treated me like a human being. Do you know how much harder that made everything? If you had hit me, if you had let your friends hurt me, I could have held on to my anger. I could have spent the next 10 years in prison telling myself that I was the victim, that the system was rigged, that the world was exactly the way my father said it was. But you didn't hit me. You sat with me. You told me a story about a bartender in Nevada. You told me my father was wrong, and the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that I believe you. I believe you because you had every reason to destroy me, and you chose not to. Nobody in life has ever made that choice. My father didn't. My crew didn't. Every person I've ever known has operated on the same principle. If you have the power to hurt someone, you use it. That's the law. That's reality. And then you broke it. You broke reality. And now I'm sitting in a cell trying to put it back together in a shape that makes sense, and I can't. Because the world you showed me, the one where strength means protection instead of domination, where a man's value comes from, what he builds instead of what he destroys, that world doesn't have a place for the person I've been for 30 years. So I have to become someone else. And I don't know how. I don't know the first step. I don't know what to build or where to start or who I'm supposed to be without the anger and the crew and the fear. But I know one thing. You said the chair is mine when I get out. I'm going to hold you to that, Derek. Ethan read the letter twice. Then he folded it carefully, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in the space beneath the bar, the same hidden compartment where he'd kept the old phone, the photograph, and every secret from his former life. Emily was watching him from the other end of the counter. She didn't ask what the letter said. She didn't need to. She could see it on his face, not happiness, not sadness, but something in between. Something that looked like the expression a man wears when he plants a seed in dry ground and isn't sure if it will grow but plants it anyway because that's what hope requires. Good news, she asked. Complicated news. That's your answer for everything. Because everything is complicated. Emily smiled. She poured him a cup of coffee and set it on the counter. Drink your terrible coffee and stop being philosophical before noon. Ethan drank his terrible coffee. The weeks turned into months. Summer burned into fall. Fall cooled into winter. The Silver Canyon Roadhouse settled back into its rhythm. Truckers, retirees, lost tourists, old Ray Patterson with his 3 beers and his dead dog stories. The neon sign got fixed thanks to Mac, who showed up one Saturday with a toolbox and a nephew who was an electrician and spent 6 hours on a ladder while Mac sat inside drinking coffee and complaining about it. This is genuinely offensive, Mac said, pushing the mug away. You say that every time, Ethan said, because it's true every time. How has the health department not shut you down? The health department hasn't found this place. Nobody finds this place. 300 men found it. 300 men had GPS coordinates and a personal invitation. Mac laughed. He was laughing more these days, or maybe Ethan was just noticing it more. The old biker president had kept his promise. Once a month, regular as the sun, he rode out to the Roadhouse and spent the day. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. Sometimes they sat at the counter in silence for an hour. 2 old men sharing the comfort of a friendship that didn't need words to justify itself. It was during one of these visits, in late October, that Max said something that caught Ethan off guard. I'm stepping down. Ethan set his coffee mug on the counter. What, from the club? I'm stepping down as president, handing it over to Vince. Vince is 38 years old, which is exactly the age I was when I took over. The club needs younger leadership. Someone who understands the world the way it is now, not the way it was in 1985. Mac, you have been president for 27 years, I know. And that's 27 years of carrying a weight that I'm tired of carrying. I watched you walk away 15 years ago, and I've thought about it every day since. Not because I resented you, because I envied you. You envied me. You had the courage to leave. I never did. Claire gave you a reason, and you took it. Nobody ever gave me a reason, so I stayed, and I kept staying. And now I'm 65 years old, and I've spent more of my life in that chair than out of it. And I'm tired, Ethan. I'm tired the way you were tired when you drove out here and bought this bar. Ethan studied his friend. Behind the silver beard and the hard eyes, he saw something he had seen in his own mirror 15 years ago. The exhaustion of a man who has been strong for so long that he's forgotten what it feels like to rest. Rest. What are you going to do? Ethan asked. Mac grinned. I'm going to buy a fishing boat. You don't fish. I'm going to learn. How hard can it be? You throw a line in the water and wait. I've been throwing lines and waiting my whole life. At least this way I get a tan. Ethan shook his head. You're serious. Dead serious. I've already got a place picked out. Lake house in Montana. 3 bedrooms, a dock, and the nearest neighbor is 4 miles away. I'm going to sit on that dock every morning with a cup of coffee, good coffee, not your coffee, and I'm going to watch the sun come up and not think about a single thing. Montana. Montana. That's a long way from Arizona. Mac's grin faded. What replaced it was something quieter, gentler. It is, but I'm not disappearing the way you did. I'm just relocating. The phone stays on, the door stays open, and once a month I'll ride down here and drink your terrible coffee and make sure you haven't died of loneliness. I'm not lonely. Ethan, you live alone, you work alone, and your closest relationships are with a 26-year-old waitress and a 72-year-old retired sheriff. That's not a social life. That's a witness protection program. It's a life, Mac, a quiet one, a good one, the one Claire wanted for me. Claire wanted you to be at peace. She didn't want you to be a monk. Ethan didn't respond to that. He picked up the dish rag and wiped the counter the way he always did when a conversation got too close to something true. Mac watched him wipe. You know, Mac said, for a man who spent 20 years in the most aggressive brotherhood in America, you have a very unhealthy relationship with that dish rag. This dish rag has never let me down. That's the saddest thing I've ever heard. They both laughed, and for a moment, a brief, warm, ridiculous moment, the Silver Canyon Roadhouse was just a bar where two old friends were laughing about a dish rag, and the past was exactly where it belonged. Behind them, winter passed. Spring arrived. The desert did what the desert always does. It bloomed briefly and brilliantly, as if the land itself was reminding everyone that beauty can exist in the harshest places if you're patient enough to wait for it. Ethan wrote to Derek once a month. Short letters. Direct. He never asked about the case or the trial or the legal proceedings. He asked about Derek, what he was reading, what he was thinking, whether he was sleeping. Derek wrote back every time. His letters got longer. His handwriting got neater. The anger which had dominated the first letter, like a bonfire, slowly dimmed into something more controlled, more reflective. He started asking Ethan questions. Not big questions, not philosophical ones, but small, practical questions that revealed more than any grand declaration could. What time do you wake up every morning? How do you decide what to do when you don't have anyone telling you what to do? Is it normal to feel like you're drowning when everything around you is calm? Ethan answered every question honestly. He told Derek that he woke up at 5 because his body had never learned to sleep past the hour when the world was quietest. He told him that freedom was harder than structure, and that the first year after he left the club, he had felt more lost than at any point in his life. He told him that drowning in calm was the most accurate description of post-violence adjustment he had ever heard, and that it didn't go away, you just learned to swim differently. In March, Agent Torres called. The trial is set for June, she said. Derek will testify. His cooperation has been exceptional. We've built cases against 17 individuals in the Phoenix organization, including 3 that the DEA has been trying to reach for 5 years. And his sentence? The prosecutor is recommending 30 months. With good behavior, he could be out in 20. 20 months. 20 months. Ethan closed his eyes. 20 months, less than 2 years. A man walks into a bar, threatens to burn it down, and 20 months later, he walks out of prison with a second chance. If that wasn't proof that the universe had a sense of humor, nothing was. There's something else, Torres said. Something I wasn't going to tell you because it's outside protocol. But I've decided that protocol, and I have a complicated relationship these days, and that's your fault. What is it? Derek asked about you during his last debrief. Not about the case, about you. He asked whether you were okay, whether the bar was still open, whether Emily was still working there. What did you tell him? I told him I'd check, which is why I'm calling. We're fine, bar's open, Emily's here, everything's the same. He also asked if you meant what you said about the chair being his when he gets out. Ethan looked at the counter, at the row of stools, at the empty one near the end where nobody ever sat because it wobbled slightly, and Ethan kept meaning to fix it but never did. Tell him I meant it, Ethan said. I will. And Torres, yes, thank you for calling, for checking, for giving a damn about one man when you've got 17 cases to build. Don't make me sentimental, Mr. Walker. I have a reputation. So did I. Reputations change. The trial happened in June as scheduled. Ethan didn't attend. He wasn't called to testify. Torres had kept her promise, arranging for his statement to be submitted in writing, sealed with his identity protected. But he followed the coverage. Not in the news, the case was federal and largely unreported, but through Torres, who called him after each day of testimony with updates that were technically violations of at least 3 federal regulations, and that she provided anyway because Ethan Walker had fundamentally altered her understanding of what justice was supposed to look like. Derek testified for 4 days. He named names, he provided dates. He mapped the entire distribution network from Phoenix to Flagstaff, every drop point, every payment, every communication. Torres said he was calm on the stand, focused, precise. Nothing like the panicked, angry young man who had been taken into custody 9 months ago. How was different? Torres told Ethan after the last day of testimony. I've handled dozens of cooperating witnesses. Most of them testify out of self-preservation. They're cutting deals, reducing sentences, saving their own skin. Derek testified like a man who was trying to fix something broken. He wasn't just giving information. He was taking responsibility. I've never seen anything like it. He's learning, Ethan said. Whatever you wrote in those letters, Mr. Walker, it worked. I didn't do anything special. I just told him the truth. In my experience, the truth, the most special thing anyone can offer. The sentencing came in July. 30 months as the prosecutor recommended. With credit for time served and good behavior, Derek would be released in 14 months. Ethan marked the date on the calendar behind the bar. Emily saw him do it. "What's that?" she asked. "A deadline." "For what?" "For fixing that wobbly stool at the end of the counter." Emily looked at the stool, then she looked at Ethan, then she understood. "You're going to give him a chance," she said. "I'm going to give him a chance. Whether he takes it is up to him." Ethan, the man, threatened to burn this place down. And I once threatened to burn down a bar in Nevada. People change, Emily. That's the whole point. If people couldn't change, then everything I've done for the past 15 years, every morning, I've woken up and chosen to be someone different than who I was. None of it means anything. Emily crossed her arms. "And if he doesn't change, if he walks through that door and he's the same person who grabbed my arm and put a gun in his waistband, then I'll know and I'll handle it the same way I've always handled it." "You mean the scary way?" "I mean the necessary way." Emily shook her head, but she was smiling, not because she agreed, she wasn't sure she did, but because she had spent enough time with Ethan Walker to know that arguing with him was like arguing with the desert. You could shout all you wanted, the desert didn't move. "Fine," she said, "but I'm not training him. You train him." "Deal. And if he insults my coffee, I'm throwing him out myself. I make the coffee." That's what 14 months later, on a Tuesday morning in September, Ethan's phone rang at 6:00 a.m. It was Torres. "He's out," she said, "released this morning. Bus ticket to Tucson. From there, he'll need a ride. I'll pick him up." "Mr. Walker, one more thing." "Yes. I filed my retirement papers last week." Ethan paused. "You're leaving the ATF." "I'm leaving law enforcement, entirely. I've been doing this for 16 years, and the Derek Hayes case was the last one. Not because it was the biggest or the most important, but because it was the first one that ended in a way I could live with. Every other case, every arrest, every conviction, every sentence, I walked away wondering if I'd actually changed anything, whether the next person in line was already stepping up to fill the void. But this one was different. This one ended with a man choosing to be better. And I realized that's what I want to do with whatever years I have left, help people choose to be better. Not arrest them after they've chosen wrong. What are you going to do? I'm starting a re-entry program for nonviolent federal offenders, helping them transition back into civilian life. Employment, housing, counseling. The things nobody provides and everyone expects them to figure out on their own. That's a hell of a career change. I learned from the best. A bartender in Arizona who convinced me that the charm isn't about catching bad guys. It's about creating fewer of them. I never said that. You didn't have to. You lived it. Ethan drove to Tucson that afternoon. He took the truck, the same truck he'd been driving for 12 years, one with a dent in the passenger door, in the glove compartment that held Claire's photograph and his old club patch. He parked at the bus station and waited. The bus arrived at 3:15 p.m. Passengers filed off, tired faces, wrinkled clothes, the blank expressions of people in transit between the lives they left and the lives they haven't found yet. Derek was the last one off. I was thinner. His face was different, not older but quieter. The sharpness was gone. The jaw that had once been set in permanent defiance had softened into something that looked impossibly like humility. He wore a plain white t-shirt, jeans, and sneakers. No leather jacket, no expensive watch. Nothing that suggested the man he used to be. He saw Ethan and stopped. The two men looked at each other across the parking lot. 23 months had passed since the night Derek Hayes had walked into the Silver Canyon Roadhouse and demanded protection money from a bartender he believed was weak. 23 months since he had grabbed Emily's arm, pulled a knife, brought 40 men to destroy a bar, and lost everything he had built on fear. 23 months since an old man sat on the ground with him and changed his life. Derek walked forward, slowly, each step carrying the weight of every letter he had written, every night he had spent in a cell thinking about his father's voice, every morning. He had woken up and tried to imagine a version of himself that didn't need to hurt people to feel alive. He stopped 3 feet from Ethan. "Hi," Derek said. "Hi," Ethan said, a long pause. "You look good," Ethan said. "I look like hell." "That's what good looks like when you're starting over, trust me." Derek almost smiled. Almost. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "I said I would. People say a lot of things." "I don't." Derek looked at the truck. Then he looked at Ethan. "Is the chair still open?" Chair's fixed, doesn't wobble anymore. You fixed it for me. I fixed it because it was broken. You being the one who sits in it is just timing. Derek's eyes glistened. He blinked it away the way he always did, fast hard before anyone could see. I'm scared, Derek said. And the admission, 2 words spoken quietly in a bus station parking lot, was the bravest thing he had ever said. Good, Ethan said. Scared means you care about getting it right. The day you stop being scared is the day you stop trying. What if I mess up? You will. What if I fall back? You might. Then what? Then you get up, the same way I got up, the same way every man who's ever tried to be better than he was has gotten up. One day at a time, one choice at a time, one cup of terrible coffee at a time. Derek laughed. It was a small laugh, fragile and uncertain, like the first note of a song someone hasn't sung in years. But it was real. Get in the truck, Ethan said. Derek got in. He sat in the passenger seat and buckled his seatbelt and folded his hands in his lap like a man who wasn't sure what to do with himself in a space that didn't have bars on the windows. Ethan started the engine. They pulled out of the parking lot and onto the highway. The road stretched ahead, long, straight, empty the way Arizona highways always are. 2 men driving toward a bar in the middle of nowhere. One who had spent 15 years trying to forget who he was. One who was about to spend the rest of his life trying to become someone new. They drove in silence for 20 minutes. Then Derek spoke. The letters, he said, the ones you wrote me. What about them? I read them every night, before lights out, every single night, like some kind of prayer. Ethan kept his eyes on the road. They weren't prayers, they were just words. They were the first honest words anyone ever said to me. My father lied. My crew lied. Everyone I've ever known told me what I wanted to hear because they were afraid of what I'd do if they told me the truth. You were the first person who told me the truth without caring whether I liked it or not. The truth doesn't need to be liked. It just needs to be said. You wrote something in the 4th letter that I've been thinking about for months. You wrote, strength isn't what you do when everyone is watching. Strength is what you do when nobody is watching and there's nothing in it for you. I must have read that line 500 times. And I think I finally understand it. When you sat down on the ground with me that night, nobody was watching. Your biker friends were there, but they weren't watching you help me. They were watching to see if I'd pull the gun. You sat with me because you chose to, because it was the right thing to do, and there was nothing in it for you. Nothing. I was the enemy. I was the threat. And you sat with me anyway. You weren't the enemy, Derek. You were a kid who needed someone to tell him the truth. I was 30 years old. That's still a kid to me. Derek looked out the window. The desert rolled past, endless, ancient, indifferent to the 2 men carrying their past through it like luggage they couldn't set down. My father never sat with me, Derek said. Not once, not when I was scared, not when I was hurt, not when I needed him. He stood over me. He looked down at me. He told me to be tougher, be harder, be more like him. And I spent my whole life trying to be more like him because I thought that was what love looked like, someone making you tougher, someone turning you into a weapon. And now I know what love actually looks like. It looks like a 60-year-old bartender driving 2 hours to pick up the man who tried to destroy his life. It looks like letters every month. It looks like a chair that someone fixed because they knew you were coming. Ethan's hands tightened on the steering wheel. Not from tension, from the effort of holding himself together while a young man said things that Claire would have wept to hear. You're going to be okay, Derek. You don't know that. You're right, I don't. But I believe it, and sometimes belief is enough to make it true. They arrived at the Roadhouse at 5:30 p.m. Emily was behind the counter. Frank was in his booth. Old Ray Patterson was on his 2nd beer talking about his dog. The door opened. Ethan walked in first. Derek followed. The room went quiet. Emily looked at Derek. Derek looked at Emily. The last time they had been in the same room, his friend Colt had been twisting her arm behind her back while Derek demanded money from the register. The silence stretched. Emily picked up a coffee mug. She filled it. She walked around the counter, across the room, and set the mug down on the bar in front of the wobbly stool, the one that didn't wobble anymore because Ethan had fixed it. Sit down, Emily said. Derek looked at her. After what I said, sit down. The coffee is terrible, but it's free, and the old man doesn't offer free things very often. Derek sat. He picked up the mug. He took a sip, and his face went through the same journey that every person who had ever tasted Ethan's coffee went through: surprise, confusion, mild horror. "That's the worst coffee I've ever had," Derek said. "Welcome to the Silver Canyon Roadhouse," Emily said. "It doesn't get better." Frank Delgado stood up from his booth. He walked over slowly, 73 years old now, moving a little stiffer than he used to, but still carrying himself with the quiet authority of a man who had spent 4 decades enforcing the law. He stopped in front of Derek. "I'm Frank," he said, "retired sheriff." Derek swallowed. "I remember. I told you to sit down. I called you. I remember what you called me. I've been called worse by better men." Frank extended his hand. "Welcome back." Derek stared at the hand. Then he shook it. His grip was uncertain, the grip of a man who wasn't sure he deserved the gesture. "Thank you," Derek whispered. "Don't thank me. Thank the man who believed in you when nobody else did." Frank nodded toward Ethan, who was behind the bar doing what he always did: pouring coffee, wiping the counter, being invisible, being exactly who Claire had asked him to be. That evening, after Frank had gone home and Ray Patterson had finished his third beer and left his $10 tip, and Derek had fallen asleep in the back room that Ethan had quietly prepared with clean sheets and a pillow, Emily sat down across from Ethan at the bar. "You know what I realized today," she said. "What?" "That night, the first night Derek came in, I was terrified. More scared than I've ever been in my life, and I thought my life was over. I thought this place was over. I thought everything was going to fall apart. But it didn't. No, it didn't. And not because you called 300 bikers. Not because the ATF showed up. Not because Derek went to prison. Then why? Because you chose kindness. In the middle of the worst night of your life, a night that could have ended in blood and fire, and everything you've spent 15 years running from, you chose kindness. You sat on the ground with a man who wanted to destroy you, and you offered him a chair." Ethan wiped the counter. "And that," Emily said, "is the most powerful thing I've ever seen anyone do." "It's not powerful, it's just right." "That's the same thing, Ethan. That's exactly the same thing." She stood up. She kissed his forehead, something she had never done before, something that crossed the invisible line between employer and family, between bartender and father. "Good night," she said. "Good night, Emily." She walked to the door, then she stopped and turned back. "Claire would be proud of you." Ethan's hand paused on the dish rag. He closed his eyes. He breathed in, he breathed out. "I know," he said, and for the first time in 15 years, he believed it. Emily left. The bar was empty. The neon sign, newly repaired, glowing properly for the first time in 6 years, hummed softly outside the window. In the back room, Derek slept the deep, dreamless sleep of a man who had finally stopped running. Ethan pulled Claire's photograph from his wallet. He looked at it one last time, at her kind eyes, her gentle smile, the face of the woman who had saved his life by asking him to change it. "I kept my promise," he said. "Not the way either of us expected, but I kept it. I found something that matters. I found people worth protecting, and I did it without losing my soul." He put the photograph back. He picked up the dish rag, and Ethan Walker, the man they humiliated, the man. They underestimated, the man who had been a legend and a ghost and a bartender, wiped down the counter of the Silver Canyon Roadhouse one final time. Not because it needed cleaning, because that was who he was, a man who showed up every morning, a man who did the quiet work, a man who proved through 15 years of silence and one extraordinary night of truth that the strongest person in the room is never the one who makes the most noise. It's the one who has every reason to fight and chooses to heal instead. It's the one who sits on the ground with his enemy and says, "Tell me how you got here." It's the one who fixes a wobbly chair because someone is coming home. They called him a bartender. They called him an old man. They called him weak and helpless and finished. They were wrong. He was Ethan Walker, and he was exactly where he was supposed to be.